Então, estamos aqui esperando o deputado federal, seu Moreira, líder da Frente Parlamentar do Agronegócio, da Agropecuária. Estamos aguardando também o Dr. Fernando Fagundes, que é o diretor do Departamento de Inspeção de Produção de Original, que é o DIPOA, representando a ministra da Agricultura, Tereza Cristina, o grande Sheik Mohamad Bukai, líder e membro da mesquita em São Paulo, Mesquita Brasil, que é a primeira mesquita do Brasil, a grande Temple Grandin, doutora Temple Grandin, uma pessoa histórica, que dispensa qualquer apresentação, doutora Erika Voogd, nossa grande amiga, nossa grande querida, que já esteve com a gente em outras oportunidades, o meu professor, meu pai, nosso presidente, o senhor Ahmad Saifi, a quem tenho um grande orgulho de ser filho e muitas vezes o orgulho de representá-lo. Agradecer a todos presentes, Amanda Barro, da BPA, né? E a nossa amiga Renata Maron, âncora da Bandeirantes, que veio participar desse dia interessante nosso, dia que vai ser histórico, e dar os parabéns pelo Dia Nacional do Pecuarista. Quero mencionar que nós havíamos uma boa expectativa de adesão, imaginávamos 200, 300 pessoas, já estamos com mais de 800 inscritos, as pessoas estão entrando, já estamos com 466 participantes aqui assistindo todos nós. Eu quero agradecer a todos, temos alunos universitários, profissionais do setor, certificadores, eu tenho pessoas aqui que estão falando comigo no WhatsApp, são pessoas de Nova Zelândia, Singapura, Indonésia, África do Sul, Espanha, a Argentina, estão todos conosco aqui, América do Sul, Estados Unidos, não dá para falar todos, a Arábia Saudita. Tem também o presidente da CIMIC, o senhor doutor Erika está nos assistindo, ao nosso grande deputado, acaba de entrar, graças a Deus, fico contente de ver o nobre amigo.
Bom dia, bom dia.
Bom dia.
Morning.
Muito bom, graças a Deus. Bom ver o senhor, muito bom ver o senhor. Fico contente de o senhor estar aqui com a gente. Eu queria falar bem rapidinho aqui qual que é a importância desse webinar. Veja que, no nosso caso, como certificador halal, nós passamos nosso tempo preocupando com a forma do abate, a segregação, a diferenciação, higienização, controle, rastreabilidade, e às vezes as pessoas começam a entender que um erro comum, achando que o bem-estar animal e o halal são duas coisas diferentes. Está errado, isso é um conceito que precisa acabar. O halal e o bem-estar animal, eles têm que andar em conjunto, eles andam em conjunto. Eu não quero entrar por muitos detalhes, porque o Bukai vai falar algumas palavras aqui, mas para que vocês tenham uma ideia, existe uma passagem no islamismo que diz o seguinte, que uma mulher entrou no inferno, depois ela tinha um gato e deixou o gato morrer de fome, trancou dentro de casa e deixou morrer de fome. E, por outro lado, uma mulher pecadora, Deus dá a ela o paraíso pelo simples fato de ter encontrado um cão com sede e deu água para ele. Tudo que ela fez na vida de certo foi tratar bem aquele próprio cachorro, né? Então, a tamanha importância que o islamismo dá à questão dos bons tratos do animal. Nada, Deus está autorizando que possamos tirar a vida de um animal para o nosso consumo. Veja a importância disso, Deus está autorizando. Então, existem métodos e forma para se fazer isso. Então, o que nós queremos deixar bem claro, mandar uma mensagem para o mundo, é que o halal e o bem-estar animal têm que estar em conjunto. Lógico que existem diferenças culturais, existem diferenças em vários países, os conceitos de bem-estar animal de país a país pode, às vezes, diferir, até o conceito dos procedimentos do halal, às vezes há uma contradição aqui e ali, mas todos eles estão com boa intenção de fazer o melhor, garantir o abate halal e o bem-estar animal. Lógico, por exemplo, tem a questão dos atordoamentos dos animais, e se algumas pessoas que entendem que é bom que tenha a insensibilização, outros dizem que não, que a insensibilização é uma tortura ao animal. Você vê que a intenção de todos eles são boas intenções, mas para isso, entender o melhor procedimento, nós temos que buscar profissionais da área para nos ensinar, para a gente debater e aprender com eles como a melhor forma de fazer. Para isso, pensamos e não vi, em minha opinião, e acredito de muitos que estão assistindo, a doutora Temple Grandin e a doutora Erika Voogd são as duas principais, as duas melhores pessoas para falar sobre o assunto. Então, eu conto com vocês, espero que vocês perguntem, debatam, fiquem à vontade. É lógico que o CDIAL, como certificadora, nós temos que fazer cumprir as regras internacionais impostas pelos países importadores, mas vamos fazer isso e, ao mesmo tempo, vamos lutar para que o bem-estar animal seja garantido, boas práticas de como tratar o animal, que vai estar, no final das contas, na nossa mesa, que está dando a sua própria vida para o nosso sustento, ele deve ser respeitado, né? E uma bênção como essa que Deus nos deu deve ser elevado a um grande respeito. E nada melhor que a doutora Temple Grandin e a doutora Erika para nos ensinar e debater como fazer isso. Agradeço, eu não quero demorar, gostaria de falar muito mais, mas eu sei que está todo mundo esperando aí as nossas estrelas. Mas muito obrigado, e obrigado a todos, e obrigado em um grande agradecimento a todos que estão participando, mas em especial quero agradecer ao meu pai, Sr. Ahmad, que eu tenho um grande orgulho de ser o filho dele e representar um homem histórico que trouxe muito benefício para toda a comunidade, um homem de grandes boas ações e sempre nos ensinou da melhor forma de se tratar e de se cuidar das coisas. Muito obrigado e assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Obrigada, Ali, Saifi, salam aleikum, com certeza, muito boas as suas palavras, essas boas-vindas, com certeza deu para a gente entender como está relacionado e cada vez anda mais de mãos dadas, né, o mercado halal com o bem-estar animal. Inclusive, também para dar as boas-vindas aqui, gostaria de já chamar conosco o presidente da FPA, Frente Parlamentar da Agropecuária, o deputado federal Alceu Moreira. Muito bom dia, é um prazer dividir esse dia especial com você nesse dia do pecuarista também, Alceu.
Obrigado, Renata. É sempre uma alegria poder estar numa sala como esta. Obrigado, Erika, doutora Temple, Sheik, Bukai, e meu querido amigo Ali, que está aqui, que viajou comigo para os países árabes. É uma bela viagem. Eu queria, na verdade, pessoal, eu vou ter que sair em 10 minutos, depois eu volto para ficar com vocês, mas tem uma reunião com o governador daqui a pouquinho. Queria apenas dizer o seguinte, o sistema de abate halal e sua certificação, para o Brasil, eles têm uma importância econômica gigante. Além disso, nossos países têm relação de amizade muito profunda, uma relação de compromissos permanentes. Mas para que isso possa gerar os resultados desejados para o Brasil, os países árabes, né, com uma população próxima a 2 bilhões de pessoas divididas, espalhadas pelo mundo, nós precisamos ter, no mínimo no Brasil, um plano decenal, 10 anos de planejamento, para que a nossa relação não fique apenas presa na relação de necessidade alimentar, comercial. Nós precisamos do mundo árabe na estruturação do país, na conectividade, na pesquisa, na questão do petróleo, onde vocês são muito qualificados no processo, na infraestrutura de transporte, os investimentos que o mundo árabe pode fazer, e fará isso, com certeza, de uma maneira absolutamente transparente e cristalina, levando em consideração a necessidade de garantia da segurança alimentar para as próximas décadas. Nós queremos fazer isto de maneira absolutamente propositiva e aberta, respeitando aos credos religiosos dos povos árabes, respeitando o sistema de abate, que hoje no Brasil é absolutamente internalizado, com comportamento aceito por todos nós, e colocando o nosso país à disposição para estruturarmos este processo de médio e longo prazo. O que é impossível fazer com o mundo árabe é continuar trabalhando com improvisos, né? Continuar trabalhando com achismos, né? Com as pessoas querendo fazer das relações internacionais sentimentos outros para explicar politicamente o que deve fazer para os seus eleitores do Brasil. para a nossa economia, o mundo árabe tem uma importância estratégica gigantesca e as nossas parcerias cada dia têm que ser mais profunda na relação de confiança, de cooperação estratégica, de deliberação conjunta na participação e evolução econômica, social entre o país, o nosso Brasil e o mundo árabe. Essa é a mensagem que eu queria deixar para vocês e queria que a FPA estivesse pronta para discutir com as suas embaixadas dos mais diversos países e com os grupos interessados nesse processo, um debate que gerasse para nós uma plataforma de interesses onde os comportamentos dentro desta plataforma tivessem absolutamente claros e regulados para todos nós.
Muito bem, muito obrigada ao deputado federal Alceu Moreira, presidente da FPA, Frente Parlamentar da Agropecuária, falando muito bem sobre essa relação entre o Brasil, países árabes, também os muçulmanos, né, que a gente sabe que esse público é muito importante e muito interessante, colocou duas palavras-chave aqui, a relação de confiança e a relação de cooperação estratégica aí, fundamentadas nessas questões para a gente manter, claro, essa cooperação tão fundamental. Muito obrigada, então, por sua presença aqui conosco. E eu gostaria agora de chamar e dar as boas-vindas ao Sheik Mohamad Bukai.
Bom dia. Eu gostaria de saudar a todos também com a nossa saudação islâmica. Assalamu alaikum, que a paz de Deus esteja com todos vocês. Primeiro, eu quero cumprimentar a todas as pessoas, grandes personalidades. Me sinto muito honrado estar aqui nessa sala junto com grandes pessoas. Obrigado, Renata, pela apresentação. Também Erika, Temple, também no deputado. E eu quero também cumprimentar o nosso grande irmão presidente do CDIAL, nosso pai, Ahmad Saifi, e também o seu filho, o grande irmão Ali, também, que é muito semelhante ao pai dele, mashallah, que Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abençoe ele, o pai dele também, que dá continuidade para esse trabalho maravilhoso. E, na verdade, a importância desse encontro, desse congresso, vem para realmente tratar que o CDIAL Halal não só apenas um trabalho, mas uma missão também. Não visa só para fazer negócio, mas para fazer também, mostrar que os animais são parte da nossa natureza, são parte dessa criatura maravilhosa que Deus criou para nós. Nós temos que saber como lidar com essa criatura e saber que o bem-estar deles faz parte da nossa espiritualidade e do bem-estar nosso também. Então, realmente um grande encontro. Nós vamos, inshallah, falar mais detalhadamente sobre esse assunto, mas esse encontro acho que é muito bom, não só construir, né, pontes também entre o mundo islâmico, o mundo árabe e o Brasil, a América Latina. Não só como deputado deixou bem claro um comércio, mas pontes culturais de colaboração, troca de benefícios em geral. Então, obrigado pelo convite e eu desejo muito sucesso para esse encontro, esse congresso. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, e a gente realmente fica encantada com toda essa audiência, com muita qualitativa aqui, vendo os recados que estão chegando. A gente agradece aí, claro, a presença de cada um de vocês. Gostaria de agradecer também a representação da BPA, Associação Brasileira de Proteína Animal, aqui conosco também. Deixa eu só fazer uma apresentação, mas como já disse o Ali, elas dispensam apresentações, né? Mas claro que a gente gosta de pontuar para a nossa audiência toda essa relevância no mercado mundial. Bom, doutora Temple Grandin é PhD em ciência animal desde 1989 pela Universidade de Illinois, lá nos Estados Unidos. Temple é líder mundial em boas práticas de manejo humanitário para animais vivos em fazendas e matadouros também. Ela é formada em psicologia e Temple possui mestrado em ciências animais com ênfase no comportamento animal. Conosco também a doutora Erika Voogd, que é presidente da Voogd Consulting. É uma empresa localizada na cidade de West Chicago, estado de Illinois, também lá nos Estados Unidos, e sua expertise inclui bem-estar animal, segurança alimentar, análise de perigos e pontos críticos de controle, garantia de qualidade, higiene alimentar e, claro, cumprimento das regulamentações do USDA, o Departamento de Agricultura dos Estados Unidos. Portanto, sejam muito bem-vindas, doutora Temple Grandin e Erika Voogd. A palavra é com vocês.
Go ahead, Temple.
It's really wonderful to be here, talking to everybody. I've worked in the industry for a long time, and just try to figure out practical ways to make things work. I also got to introduce my book, The Slaughter of Farmed Animals. My new book just came out from Cabby, and Erika and I have a chapter in here on halal and kosher slaughter. We've worked together for many years on these things, but my emphasis is on how do we find practical ways to make things work in the plant or in the slaughterhouse. This is what I've worked on for all my life.
Okay. I will say bon dia, good morning. I'm going to try this. Assalamu alaikum, I hope. Buenos dias. Hello to everybody from around the world. And thank you for attending our seminar. I'm going to open my slides, and so I think I need somebody to give me permission to have the screen. And we're going to present our slides on poultry today. So I'm hoping that someone can give me the screen so I can share my screen, the permission. Let's see here. Okay. I'm kind of new at this, so please bear with me. I'm sharing my screen.
The slides are up.
Okay. Hang on a second here. Slideshow. There we go. Okay.
It's I can see your slides fine. They're up.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is the halal and animal welfare meeting the market demands. And Temple and I are scientists. So primarily, we're going to talk about pre-slaughter handling and then actually spend a lot of time talking about the controls in the plants, transport, and in the holding and hanging and stunning, okay? Because that's where we make or break it, okay? Those are our last chances to do a good job. But first we wanted to talk a little bit about what is the quality of the meat. And in this case, we're talking about poultry and what affects the quality. And we have the appearance, the texture, the flavor, the stability with issues like the shelf life, and the quality retention. How well does it hold up in the shipping to different countries, in the freezing, in the processing? How well does the meat survive and retain good quality? Is there anything you want to mention there?
Bruises. We must make sure, handle the chickens really carefully when they're collected at the sheds, put into the travel containers, taken out of the travel containers to prevent bruising and damage to the meat due to poor, rough handling.
Okay. And just to give you some examples, all right, as a consumer, there's a very tiny restaurant in my hometown of Glen Ellen, Illinois, And it's a little restaurant that we take the children to because they have trains that deliver your food. And the man there serves a chicken breast. And it was the best chicken breast I ever had. And I said, please tell me where this came from. So he, of course, I'm a meat scientist. He brought the box out, and it's a halal chicken breast. And it was the most delicious chicken breast I ever had in my life. So every time I go there, I order this halal chicken breast. That's a perfect example of good quality. Last night, I went to another restaurant that serves the best chicken tenders on earth. They're fried in a batter that they make themselves. And there's a condition that we call woody breast, where there's actually like very large fibers in the meat, and it makes it tough and chewy and stringy. And this chicken tender had woody breast, and I only ordered one, and it was not edible. So those are two different examples of quality.
Okay, I want to make a point about woody breast. I want to explain that. Woody breast has a strong genetic component. We have bred chickens to grow faster and faster and faster. And the chicken is growing so fast that the blood supply may not completely supply the muscle. So breeding is a factor in this. Another factor is how you feed it. If you feed it for maximum fast growth, and they're genetic birds bred for fast growth, then you'll have more problems with woody breast. It's a problem that has to be solved at the farm with the genetics of the chicken and the way you feed the chicken.
Very good. And again, the thing that we emphasize, it doesn't matter if I'm in a plant, if I'm working with producers on a farm, any part of the market, is that we are the team. Every single step in this process, we're part of the team. And the chicken is the football, okay? In this case, the chicken is the football. And we need to pass a good product and a good chicken on to the next step.
No, but don't kick it like a football.
Well, no, don't kick it like a football. But what I'm saying is we need to pass our best effort on to the next step, no matter which step we're in. We need to be a team. Okay. Here we're going to mention the genetics, Temple, and the things that are so important are strong legs, practical growth, growing them at a speed that their body can keep up with the nutrition, and their body can support the bone growth and the muscle growth, raising them with low stress in a good environment. For most Latin American countries, making them heat tolerant, because most Latin American countries are warm, and then making them resistant to PSE, or pale, soft, exudative tissue, which is caused by stress and a drop in pH.
Well, another thing you want to do for good legs, it's important to measure things. And you can market ready chickens. You can actually test the chickens and see how well they walk. That's called gait scoring. At the slaughterhouse, you can look for defects such as twisted legs, which is partially genetics, partially the way you feed it. It's very important to measure these things because they can get really bad and people don't realize it. And then they measure it and realize that they have a big problem, with bad legs in chickens. And then you start to manage it. And then you can reduce the amount of bad legs and problems with walking.
Exactly. So here's some examples of chickens. The one on the left does not have good legs. So these are snapped tendons, and what happened is the chicken grew too fast and the legs cannot support the chicken, and the tendon snapped, and this bird will not go to market because it has to be euthanized because it cannot walk and it cannot go to market. So that's where the legs are not strong. The chicken on the right grew too fast and was stressed at the point of slaughter, and this is called flip over disease. So what happened is it had a heart attack at the time of catching because it was afraid. And so this is an example of a stress where the chicken had a heart attack and will not go to slaughter.
And there are genetic components in that. And you need to measure these things. You need to measure how many chickens you have the flip over disease. And
Exactly.
on a farm, I like to measure lameness, deads. Okay, other factors involved with raising chickens, breast blisters from dirty bedding, lesions on their feet from dirty bedding. These things need to be measured.
We're going to show examples of all those, Temple, coming up in the slides, okay? But this is where genetics becomes important. And if you are connected to the farm and you're connected to the people who catch the chickens on the farm, you can ask how many chickens were in the barn, how many chickens made it to the truck, and find out how many had to be culled throughout the process from the time they arrive in the barn until the time they go to the market. And so this is where you can find out really the foundation of the chicken. Is the chicken healthy, and is the genetics good, and are the chickens surviving and being handled correctly from their arrival on the farm until their departure to transport.
I want to mention another thing. It's really important when chickens are being raised for the farmer to walk through the pens so the chickens become accustomed to people walking through them. Because if you don't do this, when it's time to catch the chickens, they get scared, pile up, and injure themselves. Now, an easy way to determine if you have your building as stocked correctly, because people will lie in records. But I'll go into a building full of market-ready birds, and they should be able to move 1 meter away from me without piling as I walk through the chickens through the barn. I can also tell sometimes that the farmer only walks through the chickens by the door of the barn because they go to the other end of the barn and the chickens are piling up and they're crazy. You know, people have to walk through the entire barn, and then the chickens will be much easier to catch.
Exactly. Very good. Very good. Okay, when the chickens arrive at the plant and you're ready to slaughter and you slaughter, you can look for defects and we're going to go into a lot of detail with this, but like Temple said, we want to measure these defects. So these are some of the defects, like broken legs, bruised thighs because of catching.
A lot of sometimes bruised thighs is because they put them on the shackles and they grab them like this and they go.
Yep.
On the shackles, and that will bruise the thighs. That's a
exactly
common cause of bruising. And that bruised thigh that I see in that picture looks like one rough shackling. Grab them and then they do this.
Okay. And meat color, the PSE, the pale, the really, really pale white color. We're going to talk about that and about the meat tenderness. And again, that's not just woody breast, but it can be a symptom of the stress right before slaughter. So here's an example of PSE, or pale, soft, and exudative. You see on the left a normal chicken breast, and you see on the right a PSE. Okay, if you look at on the very right, here they are hanging in a package, and you see all this water down below. This is money that you lost. This is money that's not being sold. Okay, this is what we call purge or exudate, purge, water loss. And this, if you sell 1 kilo of chicken and you have 0.2 of a kilo in the package, that's moisture that is not going into your stomach, not being fed into the meat, and it can make the meat very dry. It can make the meat very tough. And so the idea is to keep the stress low and make the chicken calm right before slaughter, so that it looks like the chicken on the very left, the breast on the left, which is a normal pH, and that will hold the water in the meat during transport, during packaging, during freezing, during cooking.
And
Did I explain that well enough?
The PSE meat, your PSE, pale white breast, will have a very low pH.
It'll have a low pH.
It will have high lactic acid, and you can measure that in the lab. That's another measurement you can use.
Yes, and what we find is that if you have PSE meat and you have all that water in the package, who likes water? Bacteria. So this meat can spoil faster. And some of the studies.
Another problem you're going to have is if the water ends up in the bottom of the package, then you're going to end up with dried out meat, because the water is no longer in the meat, it's in the bottom of the package.
Right.
So
you have a reduced yield.
Bad.
You have a reduced yield. You can have faster spoilage. Temple mentioned the bruises. Okay. And this is a very old study, but they said that 29% of carcasses in 1995 were being downgraded for bruises. 28% had bruises. And this is a really bad bruise showing there in a thigh area, a really bad bruise.
Well, somebody probably picked the chicken up on the farm by the leg and slung it like this into the container. There's a very serious injury there. And that's probably happened out on the farm. It's just rough handling.
And blood raises the pH. It's against our regulation to sell the meat if it has a bruise like that. Yeah, so that has to be cut off and disposed of. Okay. So that's a loss in yield and a loss in economics. And the blood also causes a rise in pH and also reduces shelf life. There's bacteria that like to grow at high pH too. Okay, for tenderness, if birds are struggling right before slaughter, they lose muscle energy. For plants that are doing non-stun halal cutting of the throat, if the birds are struggling, it's much harder for the slaughterman to perform the cut. If they're struggling, they can have a rapid rigor and the meat can be less tender. Any comment, Temple?
No, that would be right. The the handling right before slaughter, really critical. Bruises, stress. The other thing you have to do is constantly supervise people, because if you do not constantly supervise people, things often get rough and sloppy, and that's true for all chicken slaughter.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the critical points. We know that many of the people on this call come from great big huge plants that have wonderful programs in place.
Yes.
We know that some of the people on the call are in university. Some of the people on the call are in smaller plants that might need advice. We know that some of you are students and you're about to head out in the world and make it a better place. So we're going to talk about this as though you know nothing, okay? And we're giving you our best ideas. The first thing is to make sure you have a written training program. And you've documented training of all employees on how to handle the live birds. And this is me in Ecuador with some of my favorite trainees, okay? And the thing is, McDonald's is the place where Temple and I learned the most about animal welfare together, because we started working on humane handling of slaughter of chickens back in 1999. And not just reviewing the records. You don't want to look at a piece of paper. You want to go out, you want to look at the piece of paper, and you want to go out into the plant, and you want to look at the name on the helmet or the name on the frock, and you want to find 5 employees and ask them if they received training. And you write down their names, and then you go back and look at the record and you see if those 5 employees are on the record. Temple, how many times are all 5 on the record?
Fake records. I've seen lots of fake records. And it's really important that the things that you write down for your standard operating procedures, we call it SOPs, are not something you copied off the internet.
Right.
That
They
is
need to be
not
real.
okay.
Yeah.
And what you write in the training materials and in your standard procedures has to be what you actually do in your plant. And we have a lot of plants now that are now with COVID are doing video auditing. So we can video over a video camera, watch the hanging area, watch other areas. But oftentimes people just look at records and they do not go into the factory or into the abattoir. I'm going to go into the factory first, records second. Records are important, but too often audits for animal welfare and food safety, I'm going to go on both of these things, turn into paperwork, just looking at records. That is not sufficient. And if with COVID, you can put a portable video camera on a person. And if I could audit a plant from my home, I can then instruct that person to walk around the factory and show me things. It's not ideal, but that's being done right now in the US because of COVID. People are not allowed to travel. But people that are managing things have to go out into the slaughterhouse and find out what's actually going on out there and not just do looking at paper or looking at computers. Right. Unless the computer's attached to a video camera that's attached to a plant manager and I'm walking him around in the factory and and I make him point that camera at the stuff I want to see.
And I'll tell you, when I go out and find 5 employees and I go back and look at the records, it's rare that all 5 are on the record. Usually I can find 3 or 4, okay? But it's rare that all 5, and they'll say, oh, that guy was out sick, that guy was on vacation, that girl had a problem, oh, she just started, we didn't get her to her yet. Okay, why is she working if she hasn't been trained? So it's really important that you make sure your people are trained and the training is documented. Also, they need to be trained in their language. Many people come from another country and you show them a paper in the local language and have them sign it, and they have no idea what it says.
It has to be in their language. I've gone over training documents. I remember one set of training documents that was in the US, beautiful documents. And I said, where's your Spanish copy? They did not have one.
Right. That's
not acceptable. I went back to this same factory a year later. No training materials in Spanish.
Now here in the US, almost every plant has Spanish-speaking people.
Well, yes. That's right. In the US, we have lots of Spanish-speaking people. And I went back a year later, no Spanish translation. I said, there's no excuse for that. You quality assurance person I'm talking to right now, you're bilingual. You need to sit down and translate these training materials.
Exactly. Okay, some of the things that the slaughterman will be trained on, and we're taking most of this guidance from the McDonald's audit tool, okay? Because really we feel that one is the most complete, all right? Really good audit. The training should be at least annual. A lot of people do it quarterly, every month. They spread it out, but at least annual. The employee on the job should be assessed by a qualified supervisor or trainer. There should be specific written programs for specific jobs, and they should be reviewed and updated annually. So an ideal training is you train the person, you give them a quiz for understanding or a test, then you go out and verify that they can do the job, okay? And visually verify that they're doing their job. So there's a written procedure, you train them, they do a test, and then you verify. Any other comment, Temple?
No, I don't think so, but I want to emphasize that you have to go out onto the floor of the plant and watch them do the job. Now, that would apply to animal handling. It also applies to food safety procedures or any other procedure.
Okay, here are some of the topics that you can include. Welfare, ethical responsibility, like Ali and the Sheik described. We're going to use these animals. We appreciate the fact they're giving their lives so that we are nourished. So we have an ethical responsibility to treat them with respect and to make sure that the end of their life is a peaceful moment. The influence on meat quality and safety. A lot of times when I take a PSE, piece of meat, and a regular piece of meat, and I cook it up and I let them taste the difference, they realize how important that low stress is. Okay, we want to talk about humane handling. We want to be able to recognize heat stress and cold stress. And we want to be able to recognize injury and pain and suffering, because in some cases, the suffering is going to require immediate euthanization. We don't want to let a bird suffer for 3 or 4 hours if it's not going to be fit for consumption. We want to euthanize it and prevent the suffering.
Well,
and then we need to train them on how to euthanize, which is to humanely kill them if they're not going down the kill line.
The easy way to determine if chickens are too hot is they'll be panting.
And we're going to show a picture of that. That's coming up.
Their beaks open.
Okay. Some of the things that we look at when we audit is we look at, are the crates in good repair? Well, you can see the ones on the left look beautiful. And the other thing with the ones on the left is that these were modified because you can see the little black spacer that was added. The chickens began to grow. And so they had to make the crates larger and taller because what happened is chickens went from like 2.5 kilos to 3.5 kilos, and they didn't fit in the crate. But look at the crates on the right. The chickens can be very easily injured in those crates. So crates should be a good repair and the right size for the right bird. Okay. And the idea for how to measure this is to measure a truck, sample half the crates with the birds in and half after cleaning. So ask how many crates are on the truck and then measure half of them on the truck and then half of them after they've been cleaned, because they should be sorted and you should not see ones going back to the farm if they are broken. And the target is to have 95% of the crates in good repair. Any comment, Temple?
I just want to comment on stocking density in the crates. And all the chickens should have enough space to all lay down without being on top of each other. That's an easy way to determine if the crates or the travel containers are overstocked. If you have, look in there and you have chickens on top of each other, no, they should be able to all lay down and not be on top of each other.
And that's an example of that right there. Okay. You don't see any chickens on top of each other.
No, I don't
okay.
see any chickens in the top one.
You didn't see them?
Where are the chickens?
Can you see that? In the top picture?
Oh, I can see them now. Okay. I can see them now. That's, they don't show up that well. I can see them now. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, they're there, but they're on the way the lighting is on the picture. They were hard to see at first, but now
yeah. So you see all their little heads, but they're not on top of each other. They're not piled.
They're not piled, and that's one of the reasons why I had difficulty seeing that there was chickens in there, because they were not piled.
Okay, good. All right. Here's an example of some suggested densities for different size birds in kilograms and also in pounds. and suggested densities and how much space they should have. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about key welfare indicators. And I have to tell you, if you want to make money, you need to measure these things. And you need to give feedback to the farms. And some of my very favorite plants, like pipasa in Costa Rica, I think this is an example of one of their charts, but they have wonderful charts and they give tremendous feedback to each farm on the key measures. And my plant in Ecuador at Pronaca, they do the same thing, and they give feedback to the farms on all kinds of different factors. And so the farms understand how they're doing. Here's some examples. Temple mentioned these. Broken legs and wings, that would have to do with the catching. The bruised thighs would have to do with the catching. And then the dead on arrival. How many did not survive the transport? And that can be partially due to stress during catching. It can also be due to the transport itself, especially if they were parked in a very hot climate, if they were stuck in traffic in a very hot climate. I have one plant in Ecuador that has a lot of problems because the chickens are transported for 3 hours, but they go from sea level to 3,000 meters of altitude. And they have a higher than normal death rate because of the altitude. So we measure dead on arrival and determine what are the causes.
I'd like to make 2 comments here.
Okay.
First of all, the altitude is going to make it more difficult for the chicken's heart. Okay, if you have live birds traveling up to higher altitudes, you may want to use a much slower growing genetics.
Exactly.
Animals bred for rapid growth, they have a really difficult time with high altitude. Another thing I'd like to mention about some of my experiences, this happened to be in the US, when we first started measuring key welfare indicators or critical control points. And in the UK, this is called animal-based indicators, animal-based measures, things like broken legs, broken wings, mortality. When we first started working on this, it was a number of years ago, the broken wings were very high. We had 5 or 6% of the birds with broken wings. And people thought that was normal. I call that bad becoming normal. Then we started to measure it. And this is work I initially did with McDonald's. We started to measure broken wings. And we very quickly went from 5 or 6% broken wings. And it's measured per bird. Is this bird good, or does this bird have a broken wing or a dislocated wing? And very quickly when we measured it, we went from 5 or 6% down to 1% or less broken wings. This is a really good example of managing what you measure. Another thing that was done was some incentive pay, where if they could keep the broken wings at a very, very low level, then they would get enough money so maybe they could take the family to a restaurant, but maybe we'll do something else during COVID, not go to a restaurant. But I was just amazed how starting the measurement system reduced the amount of broken wings, which were due to just poor handling.
Exactly. And some of the things that you think, well, catching is catching. Well, these days, if you gather the chickens in very small groups and very close to where the crates are, instead of taking the chicken to the crate, you take the crate to the chicken. Yes. And hopefully I'll get to show a video of a good example of that. But if you're carrying the chickens a long way and they're struggling the whole way, you're more likely to have wing damage, leg damage, and injuries.
Well, the problem is as you walk with them, the chickens bang against your legs.
And they flap and they get nervous.
And that breaks wings.
Yeah. Okay, so here's some actual measures on an audit. This would be the percent we would see at the plant that we would find acceptable to pass a humane handling audit. Bruises to less than or equal to 2%, broken legs less than or equal to 1%, broken wings less than or equal to 2%, and dead on arrival 0.5% as an average over many days, many flocks. All right, other measures we can do on the farm is hawkburn, and I really don't even have a terrible example of hawkburn. This is a so-so hawkburn because it doesn't happen very often.
Well,
that's when, go ahead.
I want to talk about hawkburn. Hawkburn tends to be low in parts of the world, like the southern US, where we have a lot of chickens, and in Brazil, where it's very hot and the litter stays dry. In parts of the world where it's cold, the buildings are closed up in the wintertime, the litter becomes wet. Those are the areas of the world where hawkburn tends to be the biggest problem. Yeah. When I went to some parts of Europe and Canada, colder parts of the world in the wintertime, there was some very bad hawkburn. I know we got some participants here that may be coming from colder parts of the world, but this goes back to the quality of the air in the house. Another thing we need to be looking at is ammonia levels. You may have birds with eye damage, birds with lung damage, because they're in the cold climate, they're not putting enough air changes through that building. Usually in Brazil, it's warm, and in the southern US, to keep the birds cool, you have to either have an completely open building, or you have a building with forced high ventilation.
Okay, you want to talk about foot pad lesions?
Well, foot pad lesions, it's litter damage. Now, there's different kinds of foot pad lesions. You can get one where the baby chick gets it early on, walking in wet litter. And then when the bird grows up, you have kind of a white kind of growth,
Like
looks
a
like
callus.
a giant wart on it. Or you can get a open red foot pad lesion that probably happened later in the chicken's life, when it's maybe close to market and it's red. But the bottom line is that foot is ruined. I mean, in the US, we export a lot of chicken feet to China. They call them paws. They really like them there. And if you have a foot pad lesion, you can't sell the paws to China. Again, this is something we measure it, and you will find that when you measure things like breast blisters, that's also from dirty litter, hawkburn, foot pad lesions, that there'll be big differences between farms. You'll have farms that do a very good job of managing their litter, and you'll seldom have foot damage or breast damage. And then you'll have another farm where they're sloppy and the litter gets wet, and you will have lesions on the chickens. So you keep track of this. And this might be something, in some cases, you're going to have, maybe dock the price for a lot of damage, or you give them a bonus for not having damage. But I found when you start measuring this, you can have huge differences between the different farms. Like maybe one farm is 3 times worse than another farm. There's a big difference between the best farms and the worst farms on some of these things like foot pad lesions, hawkburn, and breast blisters.
Right. And when I'm visiting a farm, like if the ammonia is bad, I can smell it at standing height. Okay. And if the ammonia is bad, it hurts the bird's feet, and they end up lying on their breasts because it hurts their feet to walk, and that's what causes these giant blisters. And of course, this is damage to the meat too. This is not going to sell well. This has to be all trimmed off, these blisters and these lesions.
But the thing that's good is that these things are easy to measure at the farm.
Yes, and so like Temple said, providing an incentive to the workers for lower defects can help to improve this, okay, and save money. All right, let's talk a little bit about transport.
I've got something I want to talk about. Can you go back to that previous slide? Is that possible? Or okay, a really easy way to measure broken wings at a plant is when you hang the birds on the line. You can see right there how that broken wing is hanging down. You can see that very easily. The broken wing just hangs down because a normal live bird will hold its wings up like this. So also, I like to score the broken wings feathers on. And the reason for doing this is sometimes the defeathering or the feather removal equipment or picking machine will damage wings. So the only way I can be sure that either that the catching and the handling caused it is to measure them feathers on like this before they go to the machine that takes the feathers off.
Okay, very good. Excellent. We're gonna look at that a little bit more too, I think. Here's an example of transport holding area when the trucks arrive, but let's talk about some of the things that happen during transport. There's an example of, if somebody's driving like Mario Andretti and hitting bumps and everything, you can get bruises on the breasts of the bird. And that's what you see on the left there. Or this is a horrible example of birds that died during transport, a horrible, horrible example. And why they died, I don't know, but they were very dead, okay? And those are examples. It can be caused by heat stress. It can be caused by cold. One thing to keep in mind, here's an example. Very few of you probably live in climates where there's snow, but there may be somebody. But this picture was taken in North America, where I live, and the snow was coming up into the bottom crates. And this company had to empty the bottom crates in the winter because the snow was coming up and freezing the birds. So you need to understand what are the differences in how you load the crates during the cold months and the hot months, and how you protect the birds with different shelter, like different slats and shelter on the trucks in the cold, and how you protect them from the heat by keeping the trucks moving. And it's so important to keep track of these measures and to communicate your results to your catchers and your truckers. That's considered a best practice. Temple, any comments there?
No, that's really good. But it's always important to give communication back. And if you had a very large amount of dead chickens during hot weather, maybe there's a very good possibility that may have happened on the truck, because the truck driver stopped at the restaurant to eat and the chickens roasted in the sun.
In the sun,
yeah, and that would be the trucker's fault. It's really important to track down, where it's occurring. Another thing I have found on looking for bruises, and this also works with cattle, is something is wrong inside the factory. You'll get the bruise on animals from many, many different sources. If the problem is one particular catching crew, then it'll just be those places that have that particular catching crew. That's one of the ways you first of all have to figure out, did it happen in the factory or in the abattoir, this broken wing, for example, or did it happen outside? If you've got broken wings from 20 different farmers, it may be rough handling in taking the birds out of the travel crates.
Exactly. Okay. A best practice for records on holding and for holding the birds is that you should have a holding time minimum of 30 minutes to let them calm down from the transport, and the plant should maintain the records on the temperature and the humidity and take corrective action when the limits are exceeded. Okay. Temple mentioned the heat stress. If you have birds sticking their heads out of the crates and panting, you probably have either very nervous birds or heat stress.
It looks like heat stress.
Right. And people will tell me, oh, they're just nervous. And I'm like, you know what? But if you look at the ones near the fan, they got their mouths closed and they're calm as can be. And these ones are too, the crates are too close together, or there's no ventilation near them. You can't even see any air movement. And so we spend a lot of time working with plants to stage them so they have ventilation nearby, and that the crates are far enough apart that and there's proper ventilation and misting if misting is needed. But again, what I tell the plant, every time that bird exhales, you lose just a little tiny bit of money, because that's a little less water in that meat. Any comment, Temple?
Well, it's dehydration. Yeah, that's really bad.
Affects everything. So that causes the PSE. If they're panting on the holding dock before slaughter, they're likely to run out of their glycogen. They're likely to have low pH, PSE, and you're going to get that water loss. Okay? And we talked about paler color, lower pH, higher drip loss, and less tender after cooking. All right. So what do you need? The holding areas need to be protected. Shade is very important. Having proper ventilation and making sure it's balanced and reaching all birds in all crates, in all trucks.
That means that you're going to have to walk through there. Can you feel the fans? The birds may be panting in one part of the shed. Another part of the shed, they are good. You've got to make sure it's really well ventilated, and you can use the animal-based measure. That's a really popular term now in Europe. Animal-based measure of panting as one of the ways to determine if your procedures you have in this shed and your fans are doing a good job of cooling them.
And what's really impressive is a lot of people have taken this shade cloth, shade cloth, and they've made curtains and awnings to protect for shade for different times of day. You might be fine in the morning, but by afternoon, the sun is coming in. You can drop the temperature about 7 C just by providing shade.
Now,
okay.
Got a question here where they said that having fans in the holding dock blowing on the load from the top down is a great mistake. Somebody's got that on there. Now, all the fans I've ever seen always blew from the sides of the side.
And I have seen people using air curtains, like the big round air curtain, like the big tubes. I've seen that. This was my favorite one of all time, and I only saw it in one place. I saw it years ago in Nicaragua, and the same water cooling we use for the chickens on the farm, they're using in the holding area. And you see they have baffles. They actually they block the air from going under the truck, and the air goes right through. So outside it was about 37 C, and in here it was about 26. And I didn't want to come out. It was beautiful where they were holding the chickens because it's water cooled holding area.
The other thing I want to emphasize is that to determine whether you're doing something right or wrong, look at how the birds are reacting. If you're getting one part of the shed where you're getting a lot of deads in that part of the shed, then you need to find out what is wrong. I'd rather go with what they call the animal-based outcome measure. Broken wing is an outcome measure. A twisted leg is outcome. A breast blister, PSE. All of these things are outcome measures. And so one thing you want to look at as you walk through here is one part of the shed really good and another part of the shed really bad.
Okay, this is a really interesting thing. We did a cold chain project also in Nicaragua. And if you paint the roof a dark color, it was 55 C. If you paint it a silver reflective color, it was 37 C. So all you have to do is change the color of the roof.
That's right. And they're doing that now I've noticed that when I haven't been on an airplane since March 12th, but I'd fly in and all of the industrial buildings now are getting white roofs.
Yes.
And it makes a big difference. It can, white, they use a white material now to cover the roof. And it's made those buildings a lot cooler.
Even on your water holding tanks, if you have big water holding tanks, and paint them silver, okay? The holding time should not exceed 6 hours. This is ideal. Birds should not be without food or water for more than 12 hours. That can affect the meat quality. And when we say 12 hours, we mean a maximum of 12 hours from the first bird caught to the last bird stunned. And as part of our McDonald's audit, the plants have to show us these records. Any comment, Temple?
We just have to make sure that they're real records. I have looked at some stuff in other industries on the fake record front, and where they cut and paste electronically records from a cold part of the world to a warm part of the world. And in the southeastern United States, they have a standard operating procedure for ice. That was obviously copied from somewhere else.
Yeah. And a really, really old story is I was in Brazil in like 2000, 2001, and they showed me their HACCP program, and it was in a bound book. And I said, this is very beautiful, but it doesn't reflect that it's going to be changed if it's in a bound book. That means that it's finished. It's never changing. And it was a very, very warm time of year, and we went out to check the temperature of the chicken coming out of the chiller, and the limit was 7, but we were getting much greater than 7. Okay, and they said, well, it's Brazil.
No,
but this was 20 years ago. Hopefully it's better now.
No, but you have to do what you're actually saying in the SOP, and you have to be always verifying it.
Yeah. Here's an example. Here's a really old picture that Temple and I took together in China, like 20 years ago, I think, of unloading the crates very gently. If they're done by people, they need to be unstacked very, very gently. This is an example of an automatic crate unstacking, and you can also see that the immediately after the unstacking, the birds go into a darkened area to keep them calm. So they've got the conveyor line actually covered so the birds remain calm. But this is a really smooth, calm unstacking.
Well, and there's also some newer systems. I got one in my book right here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's a real modern system right there for destacking. And there's all kinds of systems, from the most expensive, fancy European, very expensive system to some of the simpler systems that Erika has put in their slides. They can all be made to work. And you measure the same animal-based measures to determine whether you're getting better or getting worse. And you can do a good job or a bad job in all different kinds of systems. Because a really important thing is equipment does not replace management. No, all types of systems, from very simple to complicated, expensive systems, require management to make sure that each procedure is done correctly.
Okay. Once you unload and you start hanging, one of the things you need to be careful about, birds have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And you need to make sure that you've adjusted your equipment, like your shackles, so that these larger birds will fit on the new equipment. And this is an example. I show this picture because I feel like the employee is understanding the importance of gently holding the thighs and using only the base of the leg to hang on the shackle, so that he's protecting the thigh where the meat is. He's protecting the muscles from injury and pain, and he's only hanging by the feet so that the bird doesn't receive stress and the meat doesn't become damaged. Did I explain that okay, Temple?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Well, the other thing that you do is that you measure the damage on the legs. And if you change the procedure and you find that the damage has gone up, then you have to go back and figure out what you were doing wrong. You always have to keep measuring it.
And people have chosen to hang in a dark room. You want to explain a little bit about what the birds see for color and why we hang in the dark?
There's quite a lot that's been learned about animal vision. Animals such as cattle is partially colorblind. They do not see red. They'll see yellow, green, and blue. Chickens, they've got very good vision. Birds can see some ultraviolet, but just practical experience has shown that sometimes putting blue lights in the room where you hang them keeps them calmer. One thing that's known as just having it really brightly lit is bad. This looks like a good operation here. The people are not too close together. The other thing you've got to be careful about is how fast the hangers are forced to hang the birds. I have found with any job in the plant, don't care what job it is, you can speed up the line and you can speed up the line and it works. Then all of a sudden you exceed the rate that the worker can do the cycles. And then if it's chicken hanging, they'll start to get rough. If it's somewhere else in the plant, they leave the sterilizer steps out. There's a point where your performance catastrophically drops. And it's a very narrow range of speed. And if you exceed that, you will make it impossible for the people to hang the birds. And when you tend to get a lot of bruised thighs is when you're a person short on the hanging line and people are just like this because they can't keep up.
Okay, I want to show this picture because if you look very closely, the man in the red suit on the right is wearing a ventilator. This picture was taken nearly 20 years ago in Canada. And so he actually has on like a fresh air ventilator long before COVID, long before occupational safety here in the United States was more critical. But 2 or 3 years before that, I had been to China with Temple. The picture I took where we were in that room where they were hanging, and I almost choked to death from the dust.
Yeah.
And the smells and the dust and everything. And here, clearly, this employee has a much healthier environment because of this gas. And so making sure that your employees have fresh air is very, very critical because this can be a dusty, dirty area. Okay.
Well, another thing,
the second thing,
somebody just came up on the chat and they discussed the importance of ergonomics.
Yes.
Not having to reach too high.
Okay.
All changes in ergonomics. A simple thing that can sometimes be done, especially if you have some employees that are shorter than the other employees and not as tall, is have some little platforms that the shorter employees can stand on so they'll be at the right height. This is something I've seen plants do for other jobs too on other parts of the floor for employees that are different heights.
Okay, the other thing that you see here is you see a little colored cable tie. Is that what they're called? A little tie, a little color that's put on each shackle. This man knows he's supposed to hang on the orange shackle. So if there is a damage to the legs, we know he's the problem. If there's no damage, we know he's doing a good job. So each employee is assigned a color of the shackle, and they're given feedback and they're given incentive based on their own hanging results. Again, this was like 20 years ago.
Well, there's a lot. See, this is 20 years ago was when we really started doing the measurements, when we really had to start putting HACCP systems into the plants. You know, prior to that, people did not measure things. And what we found when we started measuring things is very quickly they improved. I want to make a comment here on this picture. Those wings are normal. If one of those chickens had a broken wing, it would hang down, it would hang straight down. You know, those chickens are holding their wings up. I don't see any broken wings there in that particular picture.
Okay. We're going to move into stunning and talk about stunning. And yesterday, Rosangela from Brazil sent me an article, maybe it was the day before, and it's in the Star, okay? And that's a UK, United Kingdom magazine.
Right here.
And this article is about, it says, does stunning an animal before cutting its neck affect its halal status?
Here, I'll just hold it up there for you. Hopefully. You
Okay, super. I've got it too. Here, I got it too. Temple and I read this article. It's an excellent article if you want to read it. But the comment they made is, stunning is a relatively new slaughter technology, which was discovered many centuries after the Quran was revealed. And this is a comment that I make to people. People say, well, we shouldn't kill animals without stunning. And I said, well, the Bible, the Quran, many of the guidances that came from the religious gods occurred 4,000 years ago before we had captive bolt guns and electrical stunning. Okay, so the guidance that we got was coming down from the gods long before we had technology.
The thing I want to mention is, okay, one of the concerns is you want the chicken or the cattle or the sheep to die from the knife cut, not from the stunning. And in captive bolt stunning, the heart definitely still continues to beat. And when I look back at those times, I kind of visualize it. Well, they wanted to make sure, first of all, that people weren't eating dead animals. Another reason would be, cutting the throat of the live animal would be preferable to taking a chicken by the legs and just pounding it on the ground to kill it. When I've looked back at some of these things, years and years ago, it was the first Animal Welfare Act, because what they would have been doing following halal or kosher would have been far superior to what most people have been doing prior to that. Now we've got situations where things are a lot different now, and we've learned that we can stun animals, and when it's done correctly, the stunning method, electric stunning, for example, makes it instantly unconscious, where if you cut the throat, it's not instantly unconscious. This is something that's very well scientifically validated. There's been a lot of research on this. And then you get into, well, how much does it hurt when you cut the throat? Well, one of the things that both Erika and I have learned is details of procedure, the right sharp knife, how you handle your animal prior is very important. And if you start to get sloppy, the procedure can deteriorate much more quickly. To do slaughter without stunning and maintain an acceptable level of animal welfare is more difficult and requires more attention to details of procedure than stunning it first. Now, there are methods of stunning that do not stop the heart, where it will die by the knife, not by the stunning method. But we've both had a lot of experience with this, and this is where your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, the knife you use. I've seen some very bad knives used for halal that they never bothered to sharpen. A really simple way to determine if a knife is sharp enough, we'll take a piece of printer paper, we'll pretend this is a knife. I should have gotten set up for this, is hold a piece of paper like this, and can the knife just go right through it? Well, the knives I got in my kitchen, I guarantee you it will not work. I could go get one of those because I'm in my kitchen right now and I can't move this computer because it's all hardwired in. There's tape all over the floor. I can't move it. I'm afraid I might break it if I tried to move it. But I call that the paper test. Then a really good knife. I've got one over here. I think I can show you what a really bad knife is going to do. I got a real terrible knife here in my kitchen. Let's see what it will do. Here's the paper. This is a terrible knife right here that's in my kitchen. But if I had a really good knife, I could just go, and it would
Right
just cut the paper. See, this knife is, no, this is a horrible knife. I cut apple up with this morning. This is the knife you don't use. The good knife, it will just slice the paper. I call that the paper test. That's a very, very simple way that you can determine whether a knife is sharp enough. And when you get the right knife, it's easy to cut the paper. It's just kind of amazing.
And for welfare reasons, it's so important to do this correctly. And for quality of the meat, it's very important to do it correctly. So we're going to talk a little bit about the stunner. Your settings are, I can't tell you this is the perfect stunner setting because every stunner is different. These are some very old antique stunners from 20 years ago, but you have water in there. When you're not stunning, you have, the thing with poultry, with chickens, is you get a very violent seizure after the initial cut. And if you don't have any type of securing of the wings, you can get wing breakage up to like 25%. So a lot of the religious slaughter plants that we see here in the United States use a cone, a bleeding cone. So they make the religious cut and then they place the bird into a bleeding cone to prevent the wings from flapping when that seizure occurs. And that can reduce wing breakage from about 25% to about 4 to 6%, okay? If you're bleeding the chickens, again, the line speeds are going to be very fast for high production. And, you know, we're talking thousands per hour and hundreds per minute. So you want to make sure the birds are fully insensible or dead prior to entering the scalder, where they're going to have the feathers removed. So we like to see a minimum of 90 seconds from the time of bleeding to the time of scalding. And that is a requirement for some of the audits. Okay.
We got a comment on here about Aldago's fixation system. I'm going to try to look this up on my phone, but my internet on my phone is not very good in this kitchen. But there was another type of fixation system. I want to emphasize people keep inventing new things. And I really like inventing new things. And if there's something better than a bleeding cone, then let's use it.
Well, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
That came up on the chat board.
Yeah. Okay. Some plants are using a bleed machine so that after the bird is stunned, it's going through a machine that cuts the neck. All right. And you want to make sure it's a complete cut and bleed. Some plants are using hand bleeding. And I don't know, Temple, if you remember this, but our first visit to China, I think we went to Shenzhen or something back in like 2002. And we went to a small halal plant and there were 4 cutters and they were singing Allah, Allah as they were cutting. Do you remember that? Do you remember they were electrically stunning?
I also remember I've been to like 1 or 2 beautiful plants in Brazil.
Yeah.
From McDonald's. And
okay, and they're halal.
They were halal. They were stunning them, but they were using a really mild stun where the birds would recover. And when you so they die by the knife, not by the stunner. Now,
Right.
one thing we had to do in this really nice, beautiful plant in Brazil was we had to move the automatic cutting machine really close to the exit of the stunner. So when the chickens came out of the electric stunner, it was maybe no further than that far away. They'd instantly
Exactly.
cut. So they'd be cut very quickly before they had a chance to wake up.
Exactly.
And there's a big controversy now in Europe about whether these stunners are effective. From me watching it, when they're managed correctly, I think they are effective, but they
Okay.
have to be managed correctly. And if the bleeding machine is too far away, then they'll wake up.
The birds will wake up. Yes, exactly. So we need to make sure that we're cutting both the carotid arteries and both the jugular veins, the trachea and the esophagus. But we also need to take care to not make contact with the spinal cord of the sensible, unstunned bird, because that can cause pain. And I believe that that's part of the religious specification.
Well, that's
or
in kosher,
guidance.
definitely. Kosher definitely has that. And they have more strict specifications for the knife. And
Okay.
I have found that those kosher specifications for the knife really do work when it comes to the paper test. Also, somebody has put on the chat board a link to this Odego's fixation restraint device.
Okay.
That's on the chat board.
I want to see that too. So hopefully they'll send it to me.
People come up with new things, and
Yeah.
then what we need to do is always let's make sure the new thing is really better. So I would set up a little experiment. Now, I'm a scientist at the university. I'm a professor, animal science. And so now my professor in me is saying we need to take the bleeding cone and we compare it now to this new Odego system. And we're going to measure different things like blood splash. We can measure welfare. We can measure some stress hormones in the chicken and measure how quickly they go unconscious. There's things we can measure to see how superior that system might be to a bleeding cone, because it's possible that somebody may invent something new that's not better. That's why it's always important to compare it back to the existing technology and do some real measurements where I can get numbers.
So, and again, I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure those knives are sharp and sharpened frequently. All right. Having a steel,
Not this knife.
to straighten the blade, having a steel available to straighten the blade is needed, as it has to be out there all the time. And a good goal is to sharpen knives every 2 hours. It may be different for each plant, but that's a good goal. And having the steel available on site every minute.
Oh, I think that sharpener show, they're the best thing ever invented. I'm
Yeah.
old enough to remember before those were invented.
Well, those things, and I bought 2 of those to take to one of my plants in Nicaragua. I think they were like $180 a piece. They were not cheap, the ones I bought, but I took them and gave, presented them to my plants in Nicaragua just so they would know what they look like. Okay, Temple, I've got 3 chickens here.
And they probably really, really liked them.
They loved them. And the thing is, they'll make their own for a lot less than $180.
But the thing is, this is an example of a technology. When they came up, the knife sharpener with a little 2 little wires that do like that, there was a major, major improvement in knife sharpening. Because I remember before we had those. They are wonderful.
Okay, what do you think of these throat cuts? Are these okay?
Well, I don't think the one on the right doesn't look so good.
No. The one in the middle is pretty good, but not perfect. The one on the left is good. Is correct. Okay.
And this is another thing that you can measure with animal-based outcome measures.
Exactly. Here's some face shield to protect the employee. One of the new systems, and this may be the Odego, I'm not sure, is electrical immobilization about 4 to 5 seconds after bleeding can reduce the seizure activity. And what I've been told is that it reduces wing breakage from 30 to 40% down to 2%.
Now, if you're going to put electrical immobilization on an animal, you have to make sure it's unconscious.
Correct.
So you have to have enough time from the throat cut to when you immobilize.
Correct.
To make so he's unconscious. The heart probably still beating, but unconscious before you apply a current to immobilize it. That same principle would also apply to shape and to cattle.
And the only way to do that is to have good training, proper technique, sharp knives, and enough people.
Well, I just saw another comment on the chat about bad knives, dull knives. I have found in all the years I've worked in this industry that simple things like bad knives or broken stunning equipment or broken travel containers, constant supervision on these simple things are very important. And people don't pay enough attention to check the knives. And the paper test, which my kitchen knife failed miserably, are very, very easy to do.
Okay, if you look carefully here on the left picture, you see how white this head and neck is. That's a good bleed.
Yes.
You can see the other two are very red looking. There's still blood left in there. If you look at this tail here, when it went through the defeathering machine, it pushed the blood that was not removed into the tail. And that's called a red pygostyle, I believe. So if you're seeing a lot of red tails, you're not removing all the blood.
Well, another problem you can get, something that'd be a very big bad welfare problem, is you can get a chicken that misses the cutter, whether it's a person, and then you'll get a bird where the entire bird after the feather removal is bright red. Now we're
going to show that too. We'll show that in a minute, I think.
Red bird.
Okay, so as a best practice, we want to record our stunner settings. We want to record that daily. We want to change our settings when we change sizes of birds. We want to know our water levels. Here they've got the measures. And as your flocks change, your water levels, you may need to adjust height of stunners as flocks change because they're different weights and sizes. Breast rubs are really important for keeping those birds calm. And when you hang them and you provide that support on their chest, they feel like they're still lying down. They're not hanging out in the breeze. So they're much more comfortable and less nervous, and it's easier to make the cuts. And there's an example of a breast rub that's curved as they turn the corner, okay? This says wet the hocks, but you can also just wet the shackles so that you get a better connection on your electrical stunner. And you can aerate the water bath just to make sure they make contact with the water, and also have a window in the stunner so you can see. This is an example of underflow. The bird, their head goes above, goes up a little bit so that the water, if the water spills over, it spills under the head of the bird to prevent pre-shock. The other problem that occurs during stunning is when you have shackle jumping. The shackle needs, the electricity comes from the water, but it needs to ground through the ground bar here. Okay, so that we make a circuit within the bird. And if the ground bar, if the shackle does not make contact with the ground bar, you lose the circuit and the bird feels the electricity. So having a double shackle guide prevents the bird from losing contact with the electricity.
Well, another thing I want to mention is it's good, really good practice to record the amperage and voltage on the meters on the control box, but that does not replace actually looking at chickens when they come out of the stunner. Is the stunner working? That's the most important thing.
Okay. Yes. Let me see here. All right. So measures, we're going to measure settings, water height, salt, if we use salt for conductivity, and we're going to maintain our equipment and keep documentation. Do you want to talk about stun efficacy, Temple?
Well, yes. And the other thing we're going to be talking about too is determining whether birds are unconscious. And when we first started working on measuring these things, stunner efficacy, when we first started working on measurements, was really bad because nobody had ever measured it before. And so our standard, originally we started at 98% efficacy. Now, if you do a really good job, you can get it higher than this, because what you want to do is continuous improvement on getting better and better. Now, when the chickens come out of the stunner, they should have a real floppy head. The head should just flop like this. Like if you pick up the head, it's like a wet, soft rag. These birds right here are insensible.
Well, this one here is a little bit sensible there.
Okay. Yeah, yes, that is.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really, yeah, that one right there, putting his head up, that's definitely sensible. It's
all right.
It's raising its head up. But I'll only tell you about the wings. If a bird is unconscious, and they come out of the stunner, the wings are going to go like this. And that's kind of a seizure activity. But if the bird starts to go like this, it's conscious. It's woken up. If it extends the wings and flaps, it's definitely conscious.
Okay.
Also, it should not be blinking. It should not be doing eye blinking. And the best way to learn what that looks like is to go out into the lairage, out into the shed where the live birds are in the travel containers, and look at how they blink. How does a nictitating membrane blink? And you kind of memorize what that looks like. And then you go into the plant. I do not want to see them hanging on the line after the stunner blinking or raising up their heads or sticking their wings out like this. But if they're doing this, this is good. He's unconscious if he just sort of does a little bit of like this. And that tends to be very common, especially with the light stunner settings, which do not stop the heart.
Okay. So with sensibility, we check the sensibility. We observe it before and after bleeding if they've been stunned. We watch them be stunned. We check sensibility after stunning. And then after they're bled, we check again to make sure they're insensible before they go into a scalder. If they're unstunned, we just check it after bleeding. Okay. We want the head to be floppy and loose, hopefully. The eyes should be glassy with a blank stare, no natural blinking of that membrane. We don't want to poke the eyes because that can cause a reflex. We can just wave a hand or look for them to put our hand up to see if they look at our hand. The signs that they're insensitive for a stunned bird that has a reversible stun like electrical stun. There should be no breathing for at least 8 seconds after the stun. The wings should be close to the body, like Temple said. It should have no pinch response or reaction.
This is still unconscious if they're just doing this, but this is bad.
Yeah, and if you're doing CO2, which I'm not sure we have very many people, they're not shackled, but we should see them rigid legs extended and constant body tremors, just quivering. If they're dead, the carcass should be limp. There should be no breathing, a dilated pupil, a blank stare, no corneal reflex, no response if you touch the eye, and no response to pinching. Okay, this is a sensible bird. This bird is what we say righting reflex, trying to sit back up, lift its head. Okay. Signs of sensible birds is rhythmic breathing. And the best place to observe that when they're hanging, you can see their rear end going up and down. All right. This one you can see is pulling itself out of the stunner.
In some of the high-speed plants, it's hard to see that rhythmic breathing, but seeing that head writing reflex, that's really easy to look at. I also find that the natural eye blinking also is easy to see. Some of the high-speed plants, I don't do the breathing. It's just too hard.
Yeah. And the eyes roll, you know, the eyes blinking naturally, or if they're looking at you, if they're lifting their head, that's very easy.
A real high-speed line, I go in there and I feel the heads. I can go like this down the heads, and if they're all like soft rags hanging down, soft wet rags, and then I can see if there's any eye blinking or any writing reflex.
Right.
That's basically what I do, and then I'll look at the vibrating wings, and if I start to see wing extension, because some of these lines are too high up to look at that rear end safely.
Okay.
Now, some of your smaller plants that you've worked with in Ecuador, then it's easy to look at the rear end of the bird for breathing. But some of the big plants that they have in Brazil and other places, it's just too fast and too hard to do that. So I mainly concentrate on looking at the heads and the wing trimmers.
Okay. And then on the bleed, if they have a bleed machine, we want 95%, and usually we count 300 on the McDonald's or 500 on the National Chicken Council. We're looking for 95% to be effectively cut by the machine. And the time from the stun to the cut, again, the goal is 8 to 10 seconds. The faster you cut after the stun, the less likely you are to have the birds wake up. And if they wake up, then they're likely to not be bled correctly. And if you have a bleed machine, you have to have a backup bleeder. You do not want any bird getting to the scalder without having a throat cut. And you want to make sure the backup bleeder has enough space to cut the bird's throats.
The other thing you need with a high-speed plant is the backup bleeder. If he's too close to the line, it's hard to see them. I worked with one plant as part of a McDonald's audit, and we actually had to enlarge that area slightly because the shackles were like this close to the person's face. And I got down in there and I got all covered with blood, and I just couldn't see them because he was so close to them. And they had to make it so maybe he could stand a meter back from the line.
Right. And this one has a face shield that helps too, so it doesn't splash all over your face.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, you want to talk anything about emergency procedures?
Well, yeah.
If the line stops?
Line stops, power goes off in the plant, what are you going to do? If a line stops for 15 minutes, the birds will probably have better welfare if you leave them on the line. But because it's stressful to take them off the line. So you have to balance the stress of leaving them there versus the stress of taking them off. Now, if you're going to have major power failure, we had a plant last year where a snake went into the plant's power supply outside the plant and shorted it out for an entire day. And in that situation, you need to take the birds off the line, and then what are you going to do with them? But you have to think about things. Another thing you have to have is an emergency program in place so that if there's a major breakdown in the plant, let's say a power failure, then the catchers are called to stop the catching, stop the transport from coming in. Right. Now, a horrible issue that's happened with COVID is so many employees were sick at the plant that they couldn't process the birds. So then they had to kill them on the farm, which is just horrible. And we need to be figuring out ways where if there isn't a problem with that, and that may have already happened in Brazil, that hopefully you can find a way to have those birds go somewhere else to be processed, or even give them away to people.
Yeah.
Because to just destroy live birds on the farm and throw them away, it's a horrible waste of food, that is also extremely unethical. And I've been writing some articles about problems that we've had with that in the US, and it was stupid things that went wrong. Like we had regulations where milk, for example, if it's in the wrong package, you couldn't sell it in the grocery store. So they were throwing milk away. Well, that's stupid. We've got to make sure now that we have, so when something big goes wrong, like a COVID infection in a poultry plant, and if you haven't had them yet, you will have them. What are we going to do with the chickens that are growing?
Right. We need to have protocols and procedures and practices. And one of the things that you can do is conduct practice drills. And we do practice recall drills. We do practice fire drills. So now we do practice drills in case there's a problem with a stoppage on the line. And video, you can make a video. And my favorite plant in Ecuador showed me the video back in 2014. And they made a video of a line stoppage and how they treated the birds. They had a written protocol and what they did with the birds in each step of the line to make sure that the birds were treated humanely and not left hanging there for hours while the line was down.
We also have to start protocols for what's going to happen if we have a major disaster, you know, like a flood,
a fire, tornado,
now
earthquake,
COVID.
Yeah.
That's another big one is what do we do with birds that are ready for market? Now, one of the things you could do in a lot of countries, and I want to make sure that it's handled right, you could let people into the barn and take the chickens. That'd be difficult to do in the US, but because you have two issues here. When you throw away live chickens, when they're thrown away, is the animal welfare issue, but there's also a very big issue on food waste. And the amount of food waste that we had with milk and livestock and poultry, it was absolutely terrible. And I've written articles on the biggest fragile, supply chain choke points. We have to figure out what to do with the chickens, and simply taking market ready chickens and throwing them away. That's
not a good idea.
Not acceptable.
Okay, we got to keep moving, Temple, because we're almost done and our time is just about up here.
Oh, so. I know. I've been looking at it. We've got 20 minutes.
Well, no, they need to ask questions.
Well, okay, we got about 5 questions, so they can ask.
So let's just talk about the critical failures. Would be automatic failure of an audit, would be live birds in the crate at the crate washer. That would be automatic failure. Any live birds in the DOA container. I have seen this. That's
I have
horrible.
too. I had a very big conversation with the plant about that. A big plant.
This is a red bird. This is a bird that still has all its blood because it was not cut and it went live into the scalder. This is horrific.
No, this is
an automatic failure.
Uncut red bird.
Yes.
And this is an automatic failure.
Okay, and then any acts of intentional abuse. And there's, again, I don't want to put a real picture of an act, but anything that you do that's abuse, that's a purposeful abuse of the animal.
Well, there's some videos online, stomping on chickens, throwing them against the wall, just really bad things.
Okay, and again, we're going to measure things like contusions, red wingtips. Red wingtips are caused when the wings flap, either during catching or during stunning. Making sure they're bled correctly and providing feedback to everybody really helps to get the best product and the best welfare and employee buy-in, and employee feedback helps them to be better employees. Okay, so we need a team approach. Brazil's always the best in football. There's Temple and I really want to thank her for participating in this. I'm so proud to have my mentor and my teacher with me today. And then again, there's our book and where to find it online.
Amazon's got it. If you have Amazon, they've got it.
Okay, and you can order it from UK as well. It's a very scientific book, and it's a very complete book, but I'm very proud that I was asked to include information in the religious chapter.
What we tried to do in this book is the chapters that I wrote, and with the chapter I did with Erika on religious slaughter, is to make these chapters more practical. And then Michael Cockrum, my co-editor, has done much more academic type of chapters, reviewing a lot of research. So I try to combine the practical along with the with the more academic. Also, on my webpage, grandin.com, I've got lots of stuff on there. If you want to take anything I've done and translate it, go right ahead and do it. There's a question there about gas stunning has to kill the bird in Europe. Yes, that would make it not okay if it kills the bird.
For halal.
For halal. Now,
For halal.
Regular slaughter, I really like, they call it a controlled atmosphere stunning, where you slowly introduce the bird into the CO2. And if you do it right, the bird has a calm induction, but you have to do it very slowly, raise the CO2. If you raise it too fast, the birds will flap and try to get out of the container. And the latest European systems, we just had one installed in the US, has windows where you can watch the induction. I've been there, and for regular slaughter, this system works beautifully, because one of the advantages I have of that system is that people in the plant never touch live birds.
Exactly.
Then I don't have to manage people touching live birds. A forklift removes the modules, they're put on automated equipment. And this is one place where an engineering solution can solve a management problem, because I've eliminated people handling live birds. So my animal welfare hat really likes this system. But we can do, but the one disadvantage is unconsciousness is not instantaneous with any kind of a gas stunning system. And it's also not instantaneous when you just cut the throat. Electric stunning, it's stressful to present the bird to the stunner, but it instantly makes it unconscious. And somebody asked here about a chance to talk with religious authorities. I would recommend that your conference organizers, this was Andraldo from with the university, for the organizers to set that up so that he could get a chance to do that. Okay, the questionnaire concerned if you use low amperage stunning that does not kill, how do I guarantee that that first of all I got to make them unconscious. Also, I don't want to kill them because that violates the religious rules. You're going to have to monitor it. One of the things you might have to do is some recovery tests.
Which is a welfare issue.
That is a welfare
for that particular bird.
It is a welfare issue for that particular bird. But if I have to find out that they did it, in fact, years ago in Malaysia, they were testing the New Zealand head-only stunning for cattle. I do not recommend doing this, but they actually took cattle and they stunned it on the head and made him unconscious. And then they let him wake up and they put him out in the pasture and he could still graze. And then they were convinced that this was truly reversible. Now, the welfare for that one particular cattle was bad, but it improved the welfare of hundreds of thousands of other cattle, because it absolutely verified that when you do a head-only stun, that cow could wake back up and function and actually graze. And that system works very well because you put the cattle's head into a head holder. There's a thing that comes up like this. So it's going from the mouth to the neck. It works, a plate goes against the nose like that. It works extremely well. Chickens, it's a lot harder to do a head only. There is a system in Europe that does that, but it's mechanically complicated. I can tell I've done this enough that when I went into the big plant in Brazil, super nice, big plant in Brazil. This was probably 5 years ago I was there. And they were doing halal, and it was a real light stun. And the chickens would wake up when the bleeding machine was too far away. And I told them they had to move the bleeding machine. But I'm confident if they moved the bleeding machine, that the birds would have been unconscious when they entered the bleeding machine. You know, they had it maybe 2.5 meters away from the exit of the stunner. I want it 0.5 meter from the exit of the stunner, and just looking at the birds. And this is where experience also matters. I'm confident that with the bleeding machine close, it would be good. Now I find out that Odago also does the top kit, and the top kit, somebody has just put this on the chat board. That's the head-only European head-only stunning system. Really good system, only disadvantage, mechanically complicated, and it will be expensive. I'm just trying to tell.
It's only for European-sized birds.
Okay, well then that's going to be a problem. Now it probably could be made for bigger birds.
Yeah.
The thing I've learned about equipment is since I'm a designer, equipment evolves. Equipment, you keep inventing new things. And then here's the chat line is saying, some countries accept stunning. They do not. Iran accepts, Saudi Arabia does not. When I put on my welfare hat, I'm going to prefer stunning them. So my stand is, if I want for the excellent, most excellent, I'm going to stun them. But if I do slaughter without stunning really well, I can have the welfare at an acceptable level. But I have to really pay attention. And I cannot use this horrible knife that I've got here in my kitchen, this dreadful knife that doesn't cut anything, it just tears. And this seems like a really simple thing about the knife, but these details really matter. As I go into plants and over again, I find the same thing, a dull knife. The stunner set wrong. They're shackling, when they shackle the birds, it's rough and sloppy. You have to keep monitoring. That's what you've got to do. Always keep monitoring, but always keep learning.
Did you see the question about fish slaughter?
No, I didn't. No, I don't.
It says, for fish slaughter, is the use of ice for stunning is ideal and humane?
There's a lot of questions about using ice. Now, I went on to Google patents, and there are many people are patenting different things to electrically stun fish. Some of the equipment, I just know from looking at the patents that these systems can be made to work, and straightforward and simple. And that's probably the way I would go, because I want equipment that doesn't break and is easy to use.
Renata, is there Portuguese questions?
Vamos lá, temos perguntas sim aqui em português, até para a gente passar para vocês e alguns comentários, né? Nós temos aqui uma questão muito importante, que inclusive é de um participante que estava aqui conosco e bastante ativo. Ao mover as aves do nível do mar para as grandes altitudes das montanhas, a mortalidade provém do mau funcionamento do coração, mas também da extrema diferença da temperatura entre o nível do mar e as grandes altitudes. Ou seja, em outras palavras, o estresse pelo frio também desempenha um papel na mortalidade?
Yes, cold stress can kill birds. I've done a lot of work in Canada, in the northern part of North America. It's very, very cold in Canada. You can get birds frozen. If it's going to be very cold, like below freezing, you may have to put tarpaulins or covers on the truck. Yes, cold stress is really important. Also, in cold stress, you need to maybe have a little lower stocking density so the birds can get away from the get away from the sides of the crate. In cold stress, there's a balance. If you put too few birds in, then they freeze to death. You put too many birds in, they're jammed up against the sides of the crates. Yes, cold stress is an issue. We've got to look at, you know, the first thing I would need to know is what is the temperature differential? Okay, we're going from this temperature to that temperature. You may have to put tarpaulins, covers on the truck. But the heart failure is more genetics. And we're starting to get problems with heart failure now in cattle. That is genetics.
Really?
Or slaughter fat cattle dying, and they open up the animal at the plant and you've got a heart that looks like a soccer ball. That's called congestive heart failure. It's really, really disgusting. And 15 years ago, we did not have this problem in cattle, but it's the same. So you have two issues here. You've got the genetics, but also the cold stress. And I would need to find out exactly how cold it is. And if it's below freezing, then they may have to have some protection put on your trailer. But you have to be careful. If you close up the truck too much, then it can get too hot inside. Because even in cold weather, you can get hot spots inside a vehicle. And one of the worst places is right behind the driver in the bottom parts of the trailer or the truck. That's one of the worst hot spots. And even in Canada, when you've got birds freezing on the outside of the trailer, you've got birds deep inside up near where the driver is dying of heat stress. You can get very uneven temperatures throughout the vehicle. Another thing that we've been doing here, some of our big companies for catching, is they've made a portable vehicle with fans on it. Because it's very, very hot in the southeastern United States in the summer. So they have a trailer, you know, pulled by a regular cab truck, and you park that alongside the truck that's being loaded, so that while they're standing there being loaded, there's wind blowing on them. That's something that we started doing probably in the last 10 or 15 years. When I first started in chicken with McDonald's, that was about 25 years ago, we were not doing that. But that saved a lot of deads, because as the chickens have gotten bigger, they've gotten more fragile and more likely to have a problem like heat stress, the bigger birds. They have a more difficult time taking the heat out of their body.
Muito bom. Tem questões também e comentários aqui chegando, por exemplo, sobre o bem-estar animal, se realmente já é uma questão prioritária aí para os consumidores. O Rogério Notoli está aqui nos acompanhando. Gostaria do comentário, então, de vocês sobre bem-estar animal está diretamente já ligado ao consumidor. Os consumidores estão cada vez mais preocupados quanto a isso e agora, de agora em diante, ainda mais?
Consumers are becoming increasingly concerned, especially younger consumers. You know, consumers under 30, they are getting very concerned. And they're very concerned about where all their food comes from. Young people all around the world are getting more and more interested in these sorts of things. Now, animal welfare is something consumers are very concerned about animal welfare. They also are very concerned about food safety. People do not want to get sick eating meat.
And the challenge in our country is that the social media, the activists spend more time telling you what's wrong with meat production than we spend telling you what's right. So oftentimes I go to STEM conferences, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, and I talk to high school students, and they tell me, you know, that the animals are abused and the animals suffer and the animals don't taste good because they were miserable. And so there's a lot of social media that convinces young people and consumers that we don't do a good job. And that's why Temple and people like you need to work very hard to do your best job and to get the message out that we do care and we are doing a good job.
Well, we need to show what we do. I have some videos They call them the glass wall videos, beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin, and turkey plant video tour with Temple Grandin. When the industry gets attacked, there's a tendency to shut the doors, not going to talk to anybody. That's the worst thing you can do. If you get attacked, you need to be opening up the doors and showing what you are doing. Now, another thing that animal rights people will do with pictures, which is really dishonest, is they'll go into a chicken house and take a picture of several dead birds, but they don't show you all the other chickens in that house that are perfectly good and perfectly okay. You know, some of that picture taking is really dishonest. I go into any chicken house, I'm going to find a few dead birds. Now, one thing I don't want to find is what I call petrified fossilized birds that are all dried up because nobody had ever gone through the house to pick up dead birds. That I do not want to see that. But we've got to be communicating with the public on what we do. And what happens when some of the plants get attacked, the managers get scared and go, oh, we're just not going to let anybody in. And Janet Riley, she's who used to work at the North American Meat Institute, and I worked on these videos. And there were a lot of people really scared about putting these videos up. And I said, we need to do that to just show what we do.
Muito bom. Temos mais questões aqui da Carla Mariane dos Santos. Eu gostaria de saber qual é a temperatura ideal para a sala de espera, a fim de garantir que os animais que estão no meio do caminhão tenham seu bem-estar garantido.
Well, I don't have that right on the top of my head, but it would be like room temperature, which ideally that would be the not cold air conditioning. Okay, I've got to think about it metric.
About
well,
27,
what?
27, 26 or 27 or less would be ideal, but that's not what usually happens.
It's not possible. You're going to get a hot spot in there.
No, the birds are very warm. They're like 39, aren't they?
Birds are, got high temperature. But the thing that you can look at, there's been a lot of studies. Let me introduce you to Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a wonderful website that enables you to look at scientific literature. So you go on to regular Google and type in the word scholar. Then you'll see a link that says Google Scholar. Click that link. A new search box comes up. Now, when you search there, it only brings up scientific papers. And you could type in temperature, stress, chickens into the search box. You'll find a lot of papers. Some of these papers, you'll see a paywall come up, other papers, but the summary, it's called the abstract. The summary is always free. And oftentimes that has enough information. And then you can write to the author and they'll send you a copy of the paper.
But one of the things that's really, really important is if you have a truck and holding, you've got to get air movement through that whole truck.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you want to make sure that if the fan is on the right side, the birds on the left side, you can feel the air coming through. And that means the birds in the middle are getting ventilation, is going to help to cool them.
That's absolutely right. And again, that's going to mean you got to go out into the shed or the lairage and look at the birds, and then panting. If they're panting, you might have the birds in the back of the truck are not panting and the birds in the front of the truck are panting. Now it's hard to see something that may be in the middle, but these are the things you can do. And the heavier the chicken is, the more problems you're going to have with heat stress.
And when you unload it, you can see what the middle looks like. And if the middle is always got more PSE and more dead chickens, then you're not ventilating properly.
All right,
and you're not cooling properly.
That's your outcome measure, PSE and dead chickens. But then you'd have to, it's going to be difficult to tell on the line which bird was in that position in the truck. But as they unload the truck, you may be able to see it.
Yeah.
You've got to figure out where the problem is.
Ok, muito bacana. A gente vai agora para o nosso momento religioso.
I want to answer one
sequência. Na sequência, a gente volta para uma segunda rodada de questões, tá? A gente já retoma essa parte das questões. E aí, claro, a gente dá continuidade aqui, porque tem muita gente na nossa audiência online. Aproveitando, então, esse momento, muito obrigada, agradecendo aqui todos que estão nos escrevendo, acompanhando. Foi uma verdadeira aula, como sempre, né? Escutar as doutoras, a doutora Temple Grandin, assim como a Erika Voogd. Então, a gente vai fazer essa segunda rodada de questões aqui logo na sequência. Deu para entender bem, sobretudo, as questões desde o início, cor, textura, sabor. O exemplo que a Erika trouxe aqui para nós, de que ela tenha comido talvez a melhor carne de frango halal aí da vida, numa cidadezinha bem próxima onde ela mora, lá nos Estados Unidos. Isso foi muito interessante ela colocar e trazer essa experiência para a gente também. A área de transportes, a área de carga, enfim, deu para a gente ter um panorama sobre o sistema do bem-estar animal, e isso foi extremamente relevante. A parte do treinamento aí dos funcionários também, isso realmente a gente tem que entender e focar na questão de capacitação do nosso time. Portanto, agora, com a palavra novamente, o Sheik Mohamad El Bukai.
Bom dia, assalamu alaikum, ou boa tarde, Jane. Assalamu alaikum, que a paz de Deus esteja com todos vocês. Eu quero agradecer muito as palestras dos doutoras, que realmente trouxeram muitas informações muito valiosas para todas as pessoas que estão participando nesse evento. E eu quero dizer que a minha fala vai ser um pouco diferente, que eles falaram da forma prática desse mercado. Eu vou falar um pouco diferente, eu vou falar da parte teórica desse mundo, desse mercado. Mas eu tenho uma sugestão também, que eu posso também deixar para as doutoras, se podem acrescentar mais um fator que eu acredito é importante no treinamento. Eles falaram muito de treinamento do equipe, né? Que eles podem falar também ou fazer ou colocar, né, um fator espiritual, né, das pessoas, ter um treinamento espiritual, porque as pessoas que estão lidando com o animal, ele não está lidando com um objeto, né? Por isso que eu quero dizer o motivo da minha participação hoje nesse mercado. Talvez se fosse outro mercado, se fosse outros negócios que as pessoas costumam fazer, a religião não tem muitas exigências, né? A religião não interfere em muitas coisas, mas por que a religião, a espiritualidade interfere aqui nesse mercado? Porque a religião, a gente vê que ele é presente nessa questão, principalmente para dizer que esse mercado é diferente dos outros, exige muitas condições. Por isso, a palavra halal já significa isso. Já 1400 anos atrás, que o profeta chamou a nossa atenção para olhar ter uma visão um pouco diferente desse mercado, ou desse benefício que pode trazer para nós. Então, a própria palavra halal quer dizer o bem-estar do animal, porque o próprio profeta Mohamad, que a paz esteja com ele, já 14 séculos atrás, falou as mesmas palavras que as doutoras agora falam para nós, que tranquilizar o animal. A gente vai ver agora os ditos do profeta, né? Primeiro, afiar a faca bem, né? E também tranquilizar o animal. Exatas palavras que as doutoras hoje falaram. Então, o halal, como eu falei, é muito bom unir esses dois mundos, material e espiritual, nesse mercado, porque esse mercado é diferente dos outros mercados. Aqui está lidando com uma vida. Por isso é muito bom saber de onde vem a paz dessa palavra halal, de onde vem essa paz dessas exigências, né, que a religião interfere e coloca para nós já há muito tempo atrás. Então, a gente tem que ter paz cultural, tem que ter paz filosófica, né, sobre como a religião enxerga como essas criaturas em geral, né, como então eu posso dizer que a palavra halal, em primeiro lugar, quer dizer aquilo que foi permitido, né, que Deus autorizou para nós. E realmente essa palavra não só na religião, uma palavra corânica que repite no Alcorão várias vezes, que quer dizer que todas as coisas que Deus permitiu para o ser humano usar, praticar, em todas as áreas na vida, não só na comida e na bebida. Mas essa palavra foi mais conhecida, mais famosa na área da alimentação do ser humano. Então, foi usada mais na alimentação do ser humano, o que pode comer, o que não pode comer. E, no final, foi agora mais específica na carne halal. Então, quando hoje a palavra halal é citada em qualquer lugar, então, as pessoas já entendem o que quer dizer a carne halal. Então, eu acredito que o ter essa palavra, essas exigências já 1400 anos atrás, traz para nós hoje que realmente a religião aprende todas as coisas, né? Ele chamou a nossa atenção para como podemos lidar com esse mundo, com esse negócio. Então, o que quero dizer que só o fato que a religião chamou a nossa atenção usando essa palavra, né, o halal, já naquela época, porque a palavra halal, nós como muçulmanos, nós entendemos essa palavra, o bem-estar animal. É isso que quero dizer. Agora, de que forma esse bem-estar vai acontecer? Isso que depende de cada época, mas o profeta colocou duas coisas bem assim, paz desse conforto, desse bem-estar, quando ele falou para afiar a faca, deixar ela bem afiada e também tranquilizar, essa palavra tranquilizar o animal. Então, esse tranquilizar o animal é uma palavra que cabe qualquer forma que deixa o animal confortável, deixa o animal tranquilo nesse processo. Então, vamos só falar um pouco da paz religiosa, da paz espiritual, como o início, né? Como o Islã, como o Corão enxerga os animais em geral, né? Porque essa é a paz que trouxe o mercado halal para o mundo, né? Essa visão religiosa, essa visão espiritual desse mundo que trouxe também essa palavra, né, para hoje. Se nós vemos o Alcorão Sagrado é um livro divino que deveria, por exemplo, ter ensinamento, né, espirituais, mas a gente vê que o Alcorão, na verdade, é um livro que tem muita fala, tem suratas que falam dos animais, né, tem grandes suratas, né, que falam dos animais. A primeira verdade que nós temos que saber, né, quando falamos nos animais dentro de um livro sagrado, dentro de um livro divino, a primeira coisa que nós temos que saber sobre esse mundo, que o mundo dos animais são um mundo à parte, um mundo específico, como Deus diz no Alcorão Sagrado, que eles são nações semelhantes a nós. Essa é a primeira verdade. A existência deles é muito importante para o equilíbrio do meio ambiente, equilíbrio para a nossa vida. Então, nós temos que ter essa visão. Primeira coisa que nós temos que saber é a importância desse mundo para nossas vidas. E não só enxergar como um mundo inferior. Deus falou, quando a gente fala que Deus falou, semelhantes a vós. Isso é exatamente o que illa umamun amthalukum. Então, quando Deus fala que são nações semelhantes a vós, é uma palavra que exige de nós muita reflexão, que esses mundos são mundos também que importantes. Não podemos enxergar esses mundos como inferiores. Ao contrário, eles são semelhantes, que Deus criou por um propósito, tem suas funções que trazem para nossas vidas. É a primeira realidade. A segunda realidade que podemos ver bem clara no Alcorão Sagrado, que os animais, entre eles, têm uma vida, têm uma comunicação, e também eles têm orações, eles glorificam nosso Criador. Então, essa visão religiosa, espiritual, é muito importante quando a gente enxerga um animal enxerga como criatura que também virtuosa, uma criatura que glorifica. Deus diz bem claro no Alcorão Sagrado que cada um tem a sua forma de glorificar, sua forma de orar a Deus, mas nós, seres humanos, que nós não entendemos essa linguagem, essa comunicação. Aliás, agora, quando eu vi essa foto que o doutor colocou, que as galinhas, né, com cabeça por fora, né, eles estavam... parece que por falta do ar, por falta de muito calor, mas eu vejo na minha cabeça, na minha mente, né, que poderiam ter uma conversa. Parece muito que eles estavam conversando uma com outra, né, passando, né, informações, um falando com outra, porque cada um tem do lado diferente. Mas em geral eles têm isso aqui. O Alcorão confirma que eles glorificam, que eles oram. Os profetas, alguns profetas tinham essa habilidade de conversar com eles, né? O profeta Salomão, por exemplo, ele teve essa capacidade de conversar e falar com os animais. Então, isso, várias passagens no Alcorão também relatam para nós essa conversa. Uma formiga que foi homenageada no Alcorão Sagrado, até os fiéis recitam o versículo que fala da formiga que levantou e falou, assim, conversou com o profeta Salomão para ele não passar naquele momento onde, ou falou para as suas amigas entrarem nas suas casas porque ele estava passando com o seu exército. Então, essa ligação entre o ser humano e o mundo animal é muito forte e muito presente no livro divino, que a gente vê. O Alcorão pode ser considerado um livro ecológico por ter muitas falas da natureza, dos animais. Uma terceira verdade também que podemos ver, que uma parte desse mundo animal, não todos os animais, né, que Deus permitiu para o ser humano usar como alimento. Uma parte desses animais, Deus autorizou para nós, falou para nós que vocês podem usar esses certos animais, não todos os animais. Deus faz com que esses animais sejam submetidos a nós, a nossa vontade. Isso é uma grande dádiva também do nosso Criador, porque se não foi dado essa capacidade desses animais de ser submetidos à nossa vontade, ninguém vai poder aproximar. Imagina, você vai aproximar de um leão. A gente tem acesso das galinhas, dos carneiros, porque eles são muito simpáticos, a gente não tem medo. Mas imagina um leão que não foi dado essa característica, né, que ele ser submetido ao ser humano. Então, alguns desses animais, Deus falou para nós, ele quem autorizou. O muçulmano já sabe que o verdadeiro dono desse universo, Deus, né, que ele permite, ele sabe, ele que determina o que é bom para nós, que não é bom, que podemos usar, que não podemos usar, porque ele quem criou, ele tem sabedoria, ele sabe como e por que criou. Então, nada mais justo quando você seguir as orientações do Criador, que fala, eu acredito que faz muito tempo a mesma coisa que nós hoje estamos debatendo, e quando a religião já fala que esse sistema halal tem que ser observado. O halal significa o bem-estar animal. É isso que quer dizer a palavra halal. Então, outra coisa que chama a nossa atenção do Alcorão Sagrado como livro divino, também ter muitas suratas. A maior surata do Alcorão Sagrado, nomeada como a surata da vaca. Essa é a maior surata do Alcorão. E tem outras suratas também, a surata da aranha, tem surata da abelhas, tem surata das formigas, muitos outros animais que estão citados no Alcorão Sagrado, um livro divino, que nós lemos esses versículos dentro das nossas orações. Então, olha, isso que quero dizer, que tudo isso é uma base cultural que leva nós a pensar por que existe o mundo halal, por que existe esse mercado, por que a religião interfere, por que a religião exige certas condições quando nós vamos usar isso aqui como alimento para nossos corpos, para nós como seres humanos. Agora, falando da segunda fonte da religião islâmica, que a Sunna. Sunna quer dizer as palavras e as ações, os ditos do profeta, que ele vem como técnico, né? Que a gente fala sempre, tem a parte teórica, Deus manda uma coisa escrita, ele revela textos, guias, manuais, né? Mas também ele manda um técnico para explicar, como as fábricas fazem, né? Que não é suficiente você colocar um manual, você tem que mandar alguém para ensinar como colocar isso de uma forma prática. Tudo aquilo que está no Alcorão, nós vemos concretizado na biografia do profeta, na prática da vida do profeta, como ele, quando ele vem aqui, nos ensinou de que forma nós vamos enxergar esse mundo, de que forma nós temos que lidar com o mundo animal. Todos os animais têm essa visão importante, têm essa visão respeitosa, têm essa visão divina, né? Que são criaturas que glorificam, que oram, que são criaturas semelhantes a nós, são mundos, os mundos das abelhas, mundo das formigas, mundos, são nações, são semelhantes a nós. Então, essa aqui a visão do muçulmano, a visão do Islã em relação a esse mundo. Agora vem a prática do profeta, como nos ensinou. Nós vemos muitos ditos do profeta Mohamad, que a paz de Deus seja com ele, quando ele falou sobre esses animais, né? Nós temos aqui muitos ditos, mas podemos destacar alguns ditos do profeta que ele falou faz 14 séculos atrás. Qualquer pessoa que planta, faz uma plantação, e dessa plantação vem um pássaro, um animal que come dessa plantação, e considerado como uma caridade para essa pessoa. Qualquer pessoa que vai ser beneficiada daquilo que uma pessoa plantou, seja animal, seja ser humano, seja qualquer coisa que vai ser beneficiada, é considerada como uma caridade para aquela pessoa que colocou a semente, que implantou. Então, aqui colocou o animal junto com o ser humano, que é alimento tanto para o ser humano enquanto para o animal. Aí tem outro dito do profeta que diz: quem tem uma misericórdia, por mais que seja como a ave, quando ela vai ser sacrificada, então Deus tenha misericórdia com ele no dia do juízo final. Então, olha essa ligação também. Acho que isso aqui é porque eu quero que esse treinamento espiritual seja feito nos treinadores também, porque o Islã, ele ligou, olha isso aqui, muito importante para o mercado halal. O Islã ligou a nossa conduta aqui com nossa recompensa no dia do final. Então, a pessoa, por mais que vê que ninguém está agora me fiscalizando, ninguém está me vendo aqui, estou fazendo, mas ele já sabe que pode escapar da punição dessa vida, mas esse animal, ele vai questionar, ele vai prestar contas diante do Criador no dia do final. Então, esse treinamento é muito importante, saber as consequências na prestação das contas no dia do final. Então, ele vem sempre colocando essas duas coisas juntas. A pessoa pode não ser punido aqui, mas ele saiba que nunca o Deus que é justo, que ele vai deixar uma coisa escapar. Agora, outro dito que foi muito citado aqui das doutoras, sem colocar, né, que o profeta, que a paz de Deus esteja com ele, falou isso há muito tempo, né? Inna Allah kataba al-ihsan ala kulli shay, que Deus prescreveu a excelência sobre todas as coisas. Então, olha, agora a excelência tem que ser com todas as criaturas. Mas agora ele especificou uma coisa. فَإِذَا قَتَلْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الْقِتْلَ. Quando vocês vão decolar, quando vocês vão abater, que façam com excelência. E de que forma essa excelência tem que ser feita? Aí ele explica: وَلْيُحِدَّ أَحَدُكُمْ شَفْرَةً, que cada um de vós tem que afiar a sua faca. Isso aqui, afiar a faca. O exemplo que o doutor ela deixou bem claro, que não qualquer faca que serve para esse assunto, tem que ser uma faca bem preparada para fazer o seu efeito rápido e sem ter tortura, né, do animal. Aí depois ele diz, وَلْيُرِحْ ذَبِيحَتَهُ. Essa aqui é a palavra muito importante. وَلْيُرِحْ quer dizer tranquiliza o animal. Qualquer coisa que deixe o animal tranquilizado, seja bem-vinda. Isso que o quer dizer o halal. O halal quer dizer isso, tranquilizar o animal e deixar ele sofrer quanto menos, melhor. Outro hadith também que o profeta diz, quando o filho do Umar, ele estava passando um dia, ele encontrou assim alguns meninos, né, colocando uma galinha, né, como objeto de brincadeira, né? Eles amarraram a galinha e começaram a tirar, né, a apedrejar para ver quem atinge. Então, quando ele passou, ele viu isso, ele ficou muito assim com raiva, falou: quem fez isso? O profeta amaldiçoou quem fez isso, ou quem faz isso com o animal. Então, foi proibido qualquer tortura, usar o animal para brincadeira. Tudo isso o profeta já falou que não podemos usar, porque essas criaturas, como já falei, estão no Alcorão como criaturas semelhantes a nós. Aí outro dito também do profeta, que também foi citado aqui do início, o irmão Ali falou, que uma pessoa estava passando no deserto, muito apertado, com muita sede, ele encontrou um poço de água, ele desceu para beber, e quando ele subiu, ele encontrou um cachorro latendo, né, quase comendo a terra por causa de tanta sede que ele passou. Então ele falou que esse cachorro está passando a mesma situação que já passava antes. Aí o que ele fez? Ele pegou o seu sapato, né, que de couro, entrou novamente no bolso, pegou água e levou para o cachorro. E o profeta continuou dizendo que Deus perdoou. Essa pessoa foi perdoada por causa dessa ação. Deus agradeceu. A palavra nefashakara Allahu lahu, essa palavra quer dizer que Deus ficou grato, com gratidão dessa pessoa por ter feito esse ato. Outra forma que foi relatado no dito também, é muito um dos milagres talvez do profeta, né, que quando ele entrou numa fazenda e encontrou um camelo, né, ele olhou para o profeta, aí o profeta entendeu que ele quer uma coisa, né, o profeta aproximou do camelo e começou a chorar o camelo, né? Aí as pessoas estavam olhando, né, o que está acontecendo. Aí o profeta falou: quem é o dono desse camelo? Aí um jovem, né, das pessoas que estavam naquele lugar falou: é meu, mensageiro de Deus. Aí falou: você tem que temer a Deus com esse animal, porque ele queixou a mim que você está deixando ele com muita fome e você está sobrecarregando ele numa coisa que ele não aguenta. Então você tem que temer a Deus com esse animal que Deus colocou sob a sua você como dono, né, sob a sua guarda. Então você tem que temer a Deus e tratar bem esse animal. Então, essas são as duas fontes mais importantes para nós. Tem um dito também do profeta que aqui está dizendo: eu como uma mulher, estou vendo agora o gato da doutora que está aparecendo, que o profeta diz que um gato, uma mulher, ela torturou um gato, ela deixou ele preso, né, num lugar fechado, não nem deu comida para ele, nem deixou ele solto para ele comer, né? Então foi castigado, ele terá um inferno no dia do final. Isso é importante ligar a punição entre essa vida e na outra vida. Essa aqui, quando a pessoa tem essa base cultural, essa base religiosa, então a pessoa já sabe que esse animal, quando eu vou torturar, quando eu vou prejudicar, então eu vou ser questionado, não só aqui, mas também no dia do juízo final. Agora, tudo isso foi também na civilização. Nós temos, como falei já, esses textos sagrados, ditos do profeta, já foram 1400 anos atrás. O Islã teve muita história, né, da convivência, ele governou o mundo por muitos séculos. Então, tudo isso, essa visão religiosa, espiritual dos animais, inspirou muitos muçulmanos, muitos sábios, né, que fazer muito trabalho lindo, tanto na área científica, enquanto na área literatura, enquanto na jurisprudência. Então, nós temos aqui, por exemplo, um dos livros muito importantes nessa área, que foi escrito em 1405, o muçulmano chama Ad-Dimiri, né, que ele fez um livro, Al-Haywan, os animais. Ele citou muitos tipos dos animais. Antes dessa data também, para falar a verdade, antes dessa data, foi um sábio muçulmano que escreveu, que o Al-Jahiz, né, Al-Jahiz, um dos sábios filósofos muçulmanos, que ele escreveu um livro também chamado Os Animais, no século IX ainda, 868. Ele escreveu um livro e colocou mais de 350 animais na pesquisa, e ele foi, na verdade, o primeiro que falou sobre a teoria da evolução. 1000 anos antes do Darwin falar e tocar nesse assunto, já esse sábio já tem todas as informações que falam sobre essa evolução do animal, já está escrita, o livro existe até agora, e tem essas informações maravilhosas. Então, essa base religiosa inspirou muitos muçulmanos a trabalhar, né, em cima desse tema, em cima desse mundo que é muito cheio de maravilhas, né, que até hoje encanta cada vez mais. Agora, na parte do tratamento na civilização islâmica, a gente vê e lê muitas coisas também maravilhas, que eu acredito que hoje precisamos também inspirar e colocar. Hoje, graças a Deus, nós temos muitas iniciativas, muitas instituições assim, que trabalham, mas é bom falar também como no passado isso aqui também as pessoas passavam. Eu cito aqui, por exemplo, as fundações. Existem fundações, entidades beneficentes que na nossa história islâmica a gente lê muitos, eles colocam fundação sobre os animais para dar remédio, dar comida, assim, para animais velhas, né, que eles ficam velhos, não conseguem mais andar. Existe hoje a gente vê fundações, por exemplo, para os estudantes, para as universidades, para o conhecimento, mas naquela época as pessoas colocavam fundações específicas só para esse objetivo. Então essa fundação, essa entidade filantrópica, né, que ela só cuida dos animais, ela só a renda que ela gera, ela vai ser direcionada para essa finalidade. Então, eu cito aqui exemplo de uma cidade, da minha cidade, Damasco, né? Eu sou de Damasco, então eu conheço essa casa, uma mesquita, agora ela uma mesquita chamada a mesquita dos gatos, né? A mesquita al-Qata, a mesquita dos gatos. Essa era uma fundação onde as pessoas só colocam assim, gatos que elas idosas, que eles não conseguem, não tem ninguém, perdidas. Então, essa fundação, as pessoas levam para essa fundação para ficar lá, dorme lá. Então, era uma casa cheia de gatos, né? E tem outra do lado também, que até hoje existe também, mas com outra finalidade, né? Para os cachorros perdidos, né? Que uma casa que foi específica, uma fundação, uma entidade só para os cachorros perdidos, que não tem dono, não tem ninguém para cuidar. Tem essas pessoas colocam uma renda fixa, né? Colocam como fundação para essa finalidade. Então, na verdade, nós vemos que tudo isso aqui foi um fruto de uma base cultural, base religiosa, base divina, que vem de uma religião, que vem de um livro sagrado. Agora, também como resultado de tudo isso, nós temos, na jurisprudência islâmica, os animais têm também muito cuidado, né? Os animais foram um um campo de pesquisa em todas as áreas na jurisprudência islâmica. Nós vemos isso aqui desde o início, né? Os juristas islâmicos, né, estudaram toda a vida do animal, o que pode comprar, que não pode, o que pode comer, que não pode, qual a impureza do animal, a saliva dele, a conduta dele, né? Você pode obter, você não pode, pode comer, não pode. Tudo isso aqui foram assuntos, né, da jurisprudência islâmica, foi muitos capítulos, né? Tem muitas opiniões, escolas islâmicas têm muitas regras, né, desse mundo também. Então, nós podemos também resumir essa parte que a jurisprudência islâmica cuidou, que essa parte da abate, né, que realmente não foi a única, mas foi uma das partes que a jurisprudência islâmica cuidou, que é essa parte do abate halal, que é o mais conhecida hoje por causa da carne, né? Então, a primeira coisa que a jurisprudência islâmica estudou, que não todos os animais que são permitidos, né, para consumo, para o ser humano. Então, isso aqui, o Islã deixa bem claro. Tem alguns animais que não foram assim preparados para esse consumo. Então, isso aqui, Deus também determinou, o profeta também falou sobre qual dos animais que o muçulmano pode comer, e nos livros da jurisprudência islâmica já tem isso aqui bem detalhado. A segunda coisa que podemos destacar aqui também nessa questão da abate halal é ser sacrificado, né? Ser abatido, né? Ou não pode ser morto o animal que vai ser consumido como comida, como alimento. E tem muitos assim objetivos, tem muitos benefícios, né, dessa prática. Como a gente sabe que Deus falou, a gente tem que refletir, nós temos que pensar muito. Mas um dos objetivos que eu acredito está bem clara, né, para nós, quando o Islã fala para não cortar a cabeça toda, né, do animal, ele tem que ser abatido de uma forma que não corta a cabeça dele inteira, para o objetivo que continua, né, o coração continua batendo, tirando todo o sangue. Ele deixa a carne, o corpo do animal limpo 100%, porque ele precisa um tempo, quando o cérebro, quando acontece a abate, não o cérebro não entende que foi uma abate, ele entende que foi uma coisa errada que aconteceu. Então, o que ele manda uma ordem para o coração bater mais forte. Então, o coração batendo mais forte, ele acaba jogando todo esse sangue fora do animal. Então, essa questão da sensibilização faz parte do bem-estar animal. Não tem quando ele não morre, né? Então, qualquer coisa que ajuda a deixar ele mais tranquilo. O profeta até falou, como passou agora nos ditos dele, uma pessoa que estava afiando a faca na frente do animal. Aí o profeta falou: você quer matar esse animal 2 vezes? Ele viu que o animal estava olhando para a faca e ele estava afiando a faca na frente do animal. Aí o profeta falou: você não tem coração? Você está querendo matar o animal 2 vezes? Então ele falou para também ver esse lado psicológico do animal. Ele olhando para a faca. Então, todos esses fatores, né, o bem-estar animal, isso que a palavra halal quer dizer. Então, isso aqui que nós podemos entender, né? Mas tem outras coisas, como falei, que podemos ainda estudar e analisar como foi uma ordem divina, uma orientação divina. Nós temos que pensar muito, nós temos que refletir muito, porque foi de um Criador, quem criou o animal, quem criou o ser humano, quem autorizou essa prática, porque essa prática não deixa de ser um abuso do animal. Então, por isso aqui vem uma outra questão que a gente tem que saber. Uma das coisas que o Islã colocou, né, quando feita a abate, né, do animal, que seja citado o nome de Deus. Para que citar o nome de Deus nesse momento, né? Citar o nome de Deus quer dizer lembrar essa pessoa que está fazendo esse ato. Você não tem autoridade, você não tem superioridade desse animal. Você está fazendo isso só porque Deus autorizou você fazer por causa do alimento. Mas isso aqui é uma exceção da regra. Isso aqui não pode tirar a vida de ninguém, nenhum animal, de nada. Mas quando você cita o nome de Deus, isso aqui está dando como se está recebendo uma autorização. E por uma causa, que essa causa tem que ser a alimentação. Isso aqui também que vem no outro assunto que podemos destacar aqui, que o objetivo desse abate tem que ser apenas alimentação. Não pode ser para outra causa, não pode ser para outra coisa. Tem que ser exclusiva para alimentar, para a necessidade, né, de alimento. Por isso que você fala em nome de Deus e fala Bismillah, que quer dizer que Deus me autorizou a fazer isso, por isso está fazendo. Se não for Ele quem autorizou, jamais eu tenho direito em cima desse animal para fazer essa coisa. Agora nós podemos resumir, para finalizar, tem muita coisa para falar, mas para resumir isso, os juristas islâmicos, eles resumiram os direitos, né, dos animais que tiraram, né, todos os textos, esses ditos do profeta, dos textos do Alcorão, eles podem ser resumidos em 4, né? Primeiro, o direito da vida. Então, esse é o primeiro principal, ele tem direito de vida, e também o direito do alimento, que tem que ser alimentado, alimentação, e também o direito de não ser judiado, não ser prejudicado, impedir a dor e impedir a tortura. Isso aqui jamais pode acontecer e ser permitida. E também nos outros, o último direito que os juristas islâmicos entendem desses textos sagrados que nós temos, o direito de ter a sua espécie protegida e preservada. Então, isso aqui também um dos direitos que mencionado também na jurisprudência islâmica. Eu agradeço muito essa oportunidade, espero que ter ajudado a explicar um pouco sobre essa visão religiosa, né, essa base filosófica, né, dessa palavra halal, desse mercado que é muito importante para todos os empreendedores frigoríficos que eles estão trabalhando, levar esse lado espiritual. Quando eles trabalham no mercado halal, no mercado da carne, eles têm que saber, é diferente dos móveis, é diferente de qualquer outra área, porque eles estão lidando com vida. A vida tem que ser com muito cuidado, com muita misericórdia, com muito cuidado e pouco quando falamos desse mundo. Muito obrigado, que a paz de Deus esteja com todos vocês.
Muito obrigada ao Sheik, ao Bukai. A gente tem aqui vários comentários que chegaram, eu vou dar uma pincelada rapidamente sobre eles. Laís, muito obrigada pelo compartilhamento. I agree in everything what was said. A Vânia, a Lúcia aqui conosco. A Janete Sandoval também nos comentários. Uma pena que muitos fatos são interpretados como se seres vivos superiores fossem somente os seres humanos. A verdade é que somos todos dependentes uns dos outros. Muito agradecida aí pelos conhecimentos compartilhados. A Amélia Queiroz agradecendo, parabéns pela iniciativa. A Júlia Martins, loving this experience of having this information. Thanks, Halal, Temple, and Erika as well. Awesome. Antônio de Carvalho aqui conosco também. Parabéns aos organizadores, CDIAL, aos palestrantes, com esse grande ensinamento e também respeito pelos animais no Islã. Aprendemos muitíssimo, que Allah lhes recompense ainda mais. Os animais de abate são as nossas subsistência, nossos alimentos. Muito bonitas as palavras do Sheik, temos que respeitar os animais, compartilhamos a terra com eles. E, enfim, a gente tem aqui, Sheik, uma abundância real aí de comentários e foi extremamente importante você conseguir colocar essa questão também, a jurisprudência, né, islâmica, dentro da questão do halal e bem-estar animal e mostrar claramente aí uma ligação entre todas essas questões e esses pontos. Então, nosso muito obrigada. E agora sim, nós temos o vídeo do senhor Saifi para nós acompanharmos. Vamos ver.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أيها الإخوة الأحبة، مرحبا بكم في مؤتمر الحلال والرأفة بالحيوان ومتطلبات المستهلك المسلم. مرحبا بكم أيها الضيوف الكرام، أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب الفضيلة، أصحاب السعادة، فضيلة الشيخ محمد البقاعي إمام مسجد البرازيل، مع سعادة النائب الفيدرالي ألسو موريرا رئيس الكتلة النيابية الفيدرالية للزراعة، السيد ممثل معالي الوزيرة وزيرة الزراعة تيريزا كريستينا، والدكتورة الشخصية العالمية المعروفة والمرموقة في مجال الدفاع عن الحيوان والرأفة بالحيوان، تامبو جرانين رائدة الرأفة بالحيوان والتي عرفت عالميا بدورها الكبير في هذا المجال، والدكتورة أريكا فوغد رئيسة المؤسسة المشهورة في هذا المجال كذلك المسمات فوغد كونسلتورية، والأستاذ العزيز الأستاذ علي أحمد الصيفي المشرف على الجهاز الذبح الحلال والمنظم لهذا المؤتمر. أيها الإخوة الأحبة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام على الجميع، أهلا وسهلا فيكم من ضيوف ومشاركين الإخوة في المؤسسات الإسلامية المشاركة من خارج البرازيل ومن داخل البرازيل ومن الولايات الأخرى، وكذلك الشركات المصدرة والمصنعة للحم الحلال. ويعني هنا نهتم كثيرا بموضوع الطيور والدواجن ومشتقاتها، BRF، أورورا، JBS، امبريزاز المشاركة معنا في هذا. مرحبا بكم وتحية لكم وأهلا وسهلا بكم إخواننا الأعزاء. يعلم الجميع عن أهمية الذبح الحلال والطعام الحلال بالنسبة للمستهلك المسلم. المستهلك المسلم إذا لم يكن هذا الطعام أو هذا اللحم أو هذا المنتج ومشتقاته ضمن الضوابط الشرعية يعتبر لحم غير شرعي ولا يجوز للمسلم أن يستهلكه. فلذلك نعطي أهمية كثيرا، والحمد لله نحن صرنا في مجال الذبح الحلال وفي تطوير هذا العمل. يعني أول مؤتمر عقدناه للحلال كان في التسعينات، كان 93 أو 32 في العام 93، وعقدنا عدة مؤتمرات 6 أو 7 لهذا في هذا المجال، كما عقدنا عدة دورات للقائمين في هذا، للمنتجين، للجزارين، للمشرفين، وكذلك عدة لقاءات ودورات للمنتجين. كما عقدنا مؤتمر متخصص لغير المسلمين أو للجهات التي لها علاقة بطريقة أخرى في الإنتاج هذا، والحمد لله كلها كانت دورات ناجحة وتدريبية وكذا. بهذا أقول يعني، وهذا شرف كبير أن نقول من خلال خبرة أكثر من 30 سنة، حوالي 40 سنة كسبنا خبرة في هذا المجال، وخبرة الحمد لله ساعدتنا كثيرا يعني لتطوير العمل وللتعرف على هذا. ونحن كذلك الحمد لله استطعنا أن نستضيف شخصيات عالمية ودينية، عدد من رئيس مجلس العبادي من رئيس مجلس الفقه في رابطة العالم الإسلامي، بعض كبار العلماء من المملكة العربية السعودية، مفتي دولة الكويت، بعض المفتين من لبنان، الخليل الميس وآخرين كذلك من الأردن ومن مصر ومن فلسطين، والحمد لله كانت يعني دعوات كبار الشخصيات وكبار العارفين والمختصين في الحلال، وكل هذا حتى نستطيع أن ننتج الطعام الحلال الذي يصلح للاستهلاك من قبل المسلمين ضمن ضوابط شرعية سليمة 100%. بهذا من خلال خبرة 40 سنة في هذا المجال أستطيع أن أقول بكل قوة وبصراحة وبوضوح بأن جهاز الذبح الحلال الذي يشرف عليه الأستاذ علي أحمد الصيفي الله يرضى عليك يا علي هو من أفضل وأصدق وأكثر خبرة وحرصا على الإنتاج الحلال من خلال هذه الخبرة 30 سنة، ومن خلال الاعتماد على كثير من الكوادر العلمية والزيارات الميدانية. يعني أذكر بعض الرموز من المملكة العربية السعودية، من جامعة الإمام، من وزارة الأوقاف، ومن مؤسسات أخرى، والحمد لله. بارك الله فيكم وأهلا وسهلا فيكم. إن شاء الله هذا المؤتمر نتوصل إن شاء الله إلى أن نتفاهم فيما بيننا ونضع خطة للاستمرار ولتطوير هذا العمل ولتدارك ما يمكن تداركه حتى يكون عملنا خالصا لوجه الله تعالى وضمن الضوابط الشرعية وضمن الضوابط الإنسانية التي تطلبها هذه الشخصيات المرموقة عالميا أتونا من أمريكا حتى يعني ننسح، وهذا ليست المرة الأولى، هذه الثانية والثالثة، والعمل مستمر إن شاء الله. شكرا للبرازيل، شكرا لوزيرة الزراعة، شكرا لمعالي لسعادة النائب الفيدرالي، شكرا للإخوة جميعا، وشكرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Nós que agradecemos ao senhor Saifi pelas excelentes palavras, explanação também muito relevante, trazendo um pouco desse contexto, né, histórico em relação ao mercado halal, às certificações, e que realmente dão um passo muito importante agora neste momento. A gente vem para a nossa segunda rodada aí de considerações finais, de questões e comentários, e só para dar aqui um panorama para vocês, audiência excelente, não só aqui do Brasil, mas de várias partes do mundo. Então, muito obrigada por toda a audiência aí internacional aqui no nosso webinar. Eu estou aqui, por exemplo, com a Andréia. A Andréia está comentando, ela é estudante de medicina veterinária. Olha, muito obrigada pelas palestras maravilhosas. Como estudante de medicina veterinária, é mais um conhecimento para a vida. Ela que é da Universidade de Passo Fundo, no Rio Grande do Sul. A Chayane Brito, mudei totalmente a minha concepção do abate halal. Parabéns pela excelente explicação que vocês nos deram. E tem também, claro, algumas questões aqui para a gente fazer aquela segunda parte aí das questões, já caminhando aí para o nosso fechamento. E entre as questões que chegaram aqui, tem uma bastante importante, que vem justamente do senhor Erika Voogd, ele que é presidente da CEMIC, o Instituto de Padrões em Metrologia para os Países Islâmicos. E ele pergunta o seguinte, tanto para Temple Grandin quanto para Erika Voogd, quais as normas e os regulamentos vocês estão usando para o abate e outros processos?
Well, I can answer that. We have our Humane Slaughter Act, which requires stunning. There is an exemption for religious slaughter. Also, good handling, low stress handling, that is required. That is in our legislation. European has a similar legislation. And as I said before in the seminar, I think it's really important to do the measurements. So you can tell, am I getting better at these practices or am I getting worse at these practices? You need to measure them. Now, there was a question about...
Muito bom, nós temos aqui mais um... Pode complementar.
there was a question about not eating meat that I saw come up on the chat board. And I have people ask me all the time, since I'm involved with slaughtering, do I eat meat? Yes, I eat chicken and I eat all the other animal proteins. And one of the things really got me thinking, I went and I learned more about crop science. This was really, really good because I knew very little about crop science. And I learned from a crop scientist that visited to give a seminar about how grazing animals, that would be cattle's a grazing animal, sheep's a grazing animal, goats, eats grass, and bison formed some of the best cropland in the U.S., in Iowa and Illinois. And what I learned from that is that the animals are part of the land. And I heard that in the religious talk, which was really good. I'd like to get some of those references. Animals are part of the land. And I'm really interested in farming sheep and cattle where there's a lot of rotational grazing with crops and with animals, because if this is done correctly, it improves the land. Chickens can be part of this too, kind of a regenerative farming. This is an area of great interest. I'm not an expert in it, but I've gotten interested in that in order to justify eating meat. We've got to make sure that we use chicken manure right. Chicken manure is very good fertilizer, but if you put too much on the land, then it damages the land. You have to have good management. You put too many cattle or sheep on the land and overgraze it, that damages the land. But if you do grazing correctly, grazing can improve the land. And I want to get some of the references from the Sheik. They'd like to get the original references. They will have to be translated for me. Also some ideas about care of the environment, because I think this is one of the ways to, justify using animals. Also in developing countries, a small amount of animal protein can make a huge difference in a child's growth and development. So hopefully that's answered that.
Perfeito. Nós temos uma questão também aqui, gostaria de chamar Ali Saifi. Ali, sua questão aqui, tanto para a doutora Temple Grandin quanto a Erika Voogd.
Olá, de novo. Queria ter a oportunidade de fazer a pergunta diretamente. Eu sei que a doutora Temple e a doutora Erika já falaram sobre isso, mas eu acho que a grande preocupação nesse último momento, inclusive o Sheik Mohamad também pode ajudar a gente, é porque nós, como certificadores, nós devemos fazer cumprir as desviações aos regulamentos dos países importadores. Nós falamos muito sobre a sensibilização, e a sensibilização dos animais não é aceito para alguns países, e outros é aceito e até incentivado. Eu sei que ela já respondeu que é a questão da faca, mas eu queria saber se há possibilidade, se você tiver mais informação sobre isso, e se há condições, em sua experiência, no tempo que vocês estão trabalhando, trazer mais informações para nós replicarmos isso, para como trabalhar de forma mais correta, forma mais organizada, se a câmara, se a questão das luzes fazem realmente tanta interferência para acalmar os animais. Eu queria um pouco mais de detalhe nesse momento, que a questão da ave é o que tem mais nos preocupado as empresas.
Well, there's a lot of information available. Erika's slides can be made available on my book, my new book. I'm going to show that again. It's available from Amazon and other places. Has information. There's a lot of different places where we can get information on these things, but we still have to work on the simple things. I'm going to show this again. This is a horrible knife right here. And it's a knife you should never use to slaughter a chicken. But unfortunately, I have seen people do that. We still have to just work on a lot of the very basic things, making sure we do them right and manage it. And I have people say to me, oh, Temple Grandin is just an old lady who talks about the same thing all the time. And I've had young people say that. But then when that young person gets out in the plants and works for about 3 years, then they find out why Temple Grandin keeps saying the same thing, because I find out that I have to. Constantly just working on basics like maintenance of the travel crates, putting the correct amount of chickens in there. Do not park at a restaurant and let your chickens roast in the truck. Just these basic sorts of things. And we do have to keep talking about them.
And let me just,
website's also got a whole lot of stuff.
a lot of stuff. Yeah.
My website, grandin.com, has a lot of stuff on poultry and on cattle. Anything you want to translate off of grandin.com, just go ahead and do it.
And just to confirm, Ali, those slides, okay, if you start with 0 and you do number 1, which is catch the chickens properly. You do number 2, which is transport them properly. You do number 3, which is keep them in a holding area where they're cool and comfortable. You do number 4, you put them in a dark room, and you do number 5, you hang them properly. Every one of those steps you need to do correct every day. You can't, and silly things happen. You have a breast rub, and the breast rub is on the line where you hang the birds. Today it's good, tonight it gets bumped, tomorrow it's not in touch with the bird. That's a problem. That's a problem. And the bird's flapping because it's hanging on the shackle. So what we find is you have to check every point every day. And every employee needs to understand my role. My role is to make sure this is correct. My job is to make sure I hang the bird gentle. I drive the truck gentle. I catch the bird gentle. I make sure the stunner's set up correctly. Each morning, I make sure the stunner guides are every single point has to be right. I make sure the knives are sharp. I do a study to make sure that birds are bled properly. Every step, every day.
That's right, every day.
Muito
Renata,
bom. O
posso-
doutor Ali quer complementar a
Posso
questão.
só acrescentar?
Ok.
Posso falar?
Pode.
Então, eu acredito também, além de tudo o que foi falado, que a gente tem que convencer também o consumidor que o bem-estar do animal quer dizer o bem-estar do ser humano, porque no final, essa carne que quem vai consumir foi você, o ser humano. Então, qualquer efeito negativo do animal, desse processo, ele vai afetar a sua saúde. Então, cada vez que o animal fica assim mais tranquilo, mais assim, seguindo todo esse processo de tudo que foi falado, isso aqui vai trazer o bem-estar para nós. Se você mesmo não pensa no animal, mas pensa na sua saúde, né?
Muito bom, Sheik. Gostaria de introduzir novamente aqui o doutor Ali para fazer a complementação aí da pergunta. Ali.
Só para complementar, acho que a doutora Temple ela ia falar mais uma coisa, eu vou querer ouvir ela com certeza, mas na sequência eu queria também completar a pergunta que na nossa visão islâmica, essa pergunta vai para as 3, tá? Na visão islâmica, nós sempre aprendemos no abate halal que o animal, para os países que autorizavam a sensibilização ou não, ela depois da degola, ela tem que mostrar algum movimento muscular para a nossa visão, para garantia que ela esteja viva, o animal, ela não esteja morta antes dela ser degolada, não seja uma carniça. Um animal morto, eu vou lá e degolo, não adianta. Então, a cultura e os ensinamentos islâmicos, nós aprendemos que o animal deve mostrar algum movimento muscular. Quando nós vamos ao bem-estar animal, como até a senhora nos apresentou, que sempre busca que o animal tem que ter 0 de sensibilidade, o animal, né, não pode ter nenhum reflexo na visão, e etc. Então, essa pergunta vai mais ou menos para todos vocês. A parte religiosa queria entender se realmente a questão da movimentação para o muçulmano é sine qua non, não há como, e também para vocês.
All right, I can answer that.
Obrigado.
I can answer that. The body, I talked about the chicken doing the tremor. The body is still alive if it's doing that little tremor. Then that tremor shows you it's unconscious, but the body is definitely still alive. A completely dead chicken would not do any kind of movements. Another thing I want to mention that I've done in a number of plants is safety for people. I went to that beautiful big plant in Brazil, and I made them put in a safety shutoff line, a cable that goes along the shackle line. So if the employee accidentally shackles his finger, he can stop the line and not lose his finger. I've made them put handrails on high catwalks at a feeding place, a chicken feed place in China. Just some very basic safety things. Like a safety shutoff cord is very, very economical to build. A lot of these very serious big accidents are actually very easy to prevent. And we also have to make sure that we give the employees a safe environment.
So just to confirm, Ali, people get confused with the animal being sensible, which means it's conscious.
Yes.
And it's feeling fear and it's feeling pain, and the animal being insensible. When you're having a surgery and you're under anesthesia, you don't remember the surgery because you're insensible. You're not dead, you're insensible.
That's good.
Okay? And so it's very easy. Even if you take a captive bolt and you put it into the head of the beef animal, the heart will continue to beat for up to 7 minutes. That animal is still alive. It's not thinking about, I have a hole in my head, because it's insensible. Okay? We've destroyed the brain and we've caused the concussion, so it's not thinking. If we've cut the throat of the chicken and it's lost the blood, it's lost the blood going to the head and the brain, and it's not thinking. The body is not dead yet. You're still going to see reflex, okay? And that's how we know that we're meeting halal requirements and animal welfare requirements.
In just a few minutes, I do have another appointment I'm going to have to go to. But it's been wonderful. This has been a wonderful conference. I've learned a lot at this conference. I'd like to get some of the Sheik's references on animals, referred back to original sources, not something, just in modern sources. I found that extremely interesting. And you've done a wonderful job with the translation. This has just been excellent, excellent conference. And I can stay about another 5 minutes, and then I am going to have to go.
Ok, muito obrigada, Temple, Erika. Não param de chegar mensagens aqui a todo momento, pessoas do mundo todo, da Turquia, da Malásia, da Espanha, muita gente aqui do Brasil. Sem palavras para esse webinar, gratidão a todos os palestrantes, foi de extrema relevância, devemos difundir mais sobre esses temas para que mais pessoas possam adquirir o conhecimento dos procedimentos do alimento até que ele chegue ao prato. Muita gente perguntando até se o webinar vai ficar disponível no YouTube, ficará logo na sequência no YouTube, inclusive siga CDIAL Halal também nas plataformas digitais, no Instagram. Márcia Benevenuto aqui conosco, agradeço aos participantes, foi o melhor webinar até hoje da pandemia, explicações técnicas e religiosas. E agora eu só peço mais um pouquinho de momento, já está caminhando para o final, para a gente acompanhar um vídeo do institucional da CDIAL Halal. Alguns minutinhos só para a gente já fazer o fechamento aí com todo mundo e os agradecimentos finais. Vamos rodar o vídeo.
Há mais de 30 anos, atuamos com certificação halal de alta qualidade, humana e consciente. A empresa com mais categorias para certificação halal no Brasil. A CDIAL HALAL é uma das principais empresas no âmbito nacional no que diz respeito à específica certificação halal no setor alimentício e figura entre as maiores certificadoras halal de proteína animal no mundo, em atuação com as principais exportadoras brasileiras. Somos uma empresa que busca alcançar a qualidade e excelência na certificação halal e contribuir com o crescimento da comunidade islâmica através de atividades em conjunto com instituições islâmicas e assessorar empresas interessadas em operar comercialmente no mercado do mundo islâmico. Por isso, além da certificadora, atuamos também no Centro de Divulgação do Islã para a América Latina, com sede em São Bernardo do Campo, São Paulo, que tem por objetivo divulgar a cultura e o conhecimento islâmico através de diversas atividades. Focada em sua missão de ser reconhecida mundialmente, não apenas pela comunidade islâmica, mas pelo mundo todo por sua extrema qualidade e cuidado, a CDIAL HALAL atua com a CDIAL Academy, um centro de capacitação para quem deseja abrir um mundo em oportunidades na exportação com conteúdos exclusivos e certificados em todo o universo halal, desde o conhecimento religioso, cultural e técnico. Nossa função é beneficiar os produtos e comportamento halal, garantindo e suprindo mão de obra especializada para o processo de produção deste tipo de alimento, tornando-os saudáveis e lícitos para o consumo dos muçulmanos e não muçulmanos em todo o mundo. Obtenha a certificação halal e exporte sua marca para o mundo. Existem mais de 1,8 bilhões de oportunidades te esperando. Acesse cdialhalal.com.br.
Excelente, muito obrigada. A gente agradece com certeza a participação de todos que estiveram conosco aqui nesse webinar. Thank you, Temple Grandin. Thank you, Erika Voogd. It was a wonderful time to share your experience with our audience. And we are going to be another meeting at 29. A gente vai fazer um próximo webinar no próximo dia 29 de julho, focado na questão dos bovinos. Já estão perguntando aqui sobre os vídeos, onde ficará disponível. Daqui a pouquinho no YouTube, nas plataformas digitais. Siga a CDIAL HALAL e, claro, você pode fazer essa troca e acompanhamento de conteúdo. Salam aleikum, Sheik. Foi maravilhoso ter também a sua parte aqui fundamentada na questão jurisprudência islâmica. Muita gente comentando aqui conosco. E para a gente fazer, então, esse fechamento, claro, com a palavra Ali, já agradecendo também a você sempre pela confiança. Muito obrigada. Ali, com você.
Renata, eu tenho que te dizer que eu estou muito feliz, estava muito preocupado, que é o nosso primeiro webinar, mas, na verdade, fica fácil fazer um webinar de sucesso se as pessoas são bem escolhidas, né? Então, a doutora Temple é uma pessoa histórica, né? Nós vamos sempre aprender com ela. Estou muito orgulhoso de ter feito um webinar com a doutora Temple. A doutora Erika, uma pessoa que eu sou fã, que é nossa amiga, nossa querida, né? Então, fica muito fácil, né? A gente, né? E com um público maravilhoso, graças a Deus, até agora, e passou, acho que 1 hora a mais do previsto, está todo mundo assistindo. Sheik Ahmad Bukai, muito obrigado. O senhor conseguiu explicar de uma forma simples, carinhosa. Veja, uma pessoa tão importante, a doutora Temple está ansiosa de receber teu material. Eu acho que essa mensagem, a mensagem que nós vamos mandar para o mundo, que o halal e o bem-estar animal é um só, nós temos que trabalhar em conjunto, parar de pensar que são coisas diferentes, o halal, nós devemos questionar o bem-estar animal, foi assim que o profeta Mohamad nos ensinou, é assim que nós devemos fazer, devemos respeitar as regras de todos os países que exigem, não permitem o stunning, ponto final. Temos que encontrar uma outra forma, existem diferentes entendimentos. Então, eu quero agradecer profundamente. Estou recebendo mensagem aqui no meu WhatsApp de um irmão meu, Yad, lá da Holanda, da Espanha. Tem até pessoa da autoridade da Jaquim, que é a autoridade que cuida do halal para a Malásia. Tem um pessoal de Singapura, tem um pessoal da Indonésia. Eu tenho o Sr. Hassan, o líder da CIMIC, que é o da Standard and Methodology Institute for Islamic Countries. Eles fazem os regulamentos para os países islâmicos. Agradeço de coração, muito obrigado. E, novamente, em especial, dona Renata, muito bom ter você com a gente, nossa querida amiga da Bandeirantes, âncora do Terra Viva, que esteve na Arábia Saudita e teve a oportunidade de ver o halal, ver a vida dos muçulmanos como ela é. Quero frisar novamente o convite para todos participar no dia 29. Desculpa pelos primeiros erros, que ainda falta um pouco de experiência, mas, olha, muito obrigado, eu estou muito contente. E um cumprimento islâmico...
Thank you to Katya and Rebecca for translating. Thank you to Renata. Always thank you to my teacher, Temple. Thank you, Sheik. Thank you, Congressman. It's a pleasure.
Obrigado.
I just want to thank everybody. I loved your talk, Sheik. Want to get some of your references, and you've done just a wonderful job with this conference, and I'm just so happy to be here.
Obrigado.
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 Bom, muito obrigada a todos. A gente caminha agora, então, para o encerramento dessa webinar. Webinar CDIAL HALAL, Mercado HALAL, demandas, bem-estar animal. Já tem muita gente aqui escrevendo ansiosa para o próximo webinar, que será então no próximo dia 29 de julho, também com as presenças ilustres da doutora Temple Grandin e da Erika Voogd. Muitíssimo obrigada ao Sheik, muita gente escrevendo aqui que deu para sentir a forma muito amorosa e carinhosa e a explanação que o senhor nos transmitiu. Então foi muito interessante aqui, não param de chegar mensagens, a nossa audiência aqui no Brasil e fora. Muito obrigada a todos vocês e nos encontramos com certeza no próximo dia 29 de julho, onde falaremos sobre a carne aí bovina, também dentro de todo esse sistema halal. Então, muito obrigada. Você pode acessar o nosso conteúdo em breve no nosso YouTube, nas nossas redes sociais. Nos siga no Instagram, @CDIAL HALAL, e tenham todos uma excelente tarde. Até o dia 29.
Obrigado.
Tchau.
Tchau. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Tchau, assalamu alaikum.
Tchau.